Hey, what's going on, everybody? Hi, welcome to the program. It's the Jeff Gerstmann Show. It is May 9th, and I am your host for this week's installment of the program. My name is Jeff Gerstmann. Well, it's been an interesting week here in the world of video games. In the world of video games. A lot of things happening here. I'm in the middle of booking appointments for June stuff. I'm gonna get out there and see some video games, and it's a lot of emails and schedule management. It's fine, but I'm kind of in the throes of that, and I'm just entering the throes of that. I booked one appointment for a mystery game, and I don't know what it is, but I think I know what it is. And it's the sort of thing where you're just like, I'm gonna get here, and I hope it's the thing I think it is, because if it's not, then hopefully it'll be something else cool, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, so there's just a lot of stuff like that, and then a lot of a lot of known quantities. Obviously, like a lot of games have been announced, and have not shipped yet. So there are plenty of companies that are just like, here are the 4 games we have. You should come see them, and you can interview somebody if you want. And I'm like, okay, sure, I can do that. And just trying to take a look of what that week is going to look like. Now there's rumors going around that Sony is going to try to jumpstart things and go like a week earlier than all of this stuff to get out there. So we'll see if that ends up coming to pass. Seems like they could do that if they don't want to save it for Paris Games Week or whatever. So yeah, maybe we'll see them go first. I don't know, but right now it looks like it's the kickoff stream that Keeley will do. There's then the days where people will be seeing games and reporting on them, and then you'll have Microsoft with their Starfield thing, and then Ubisoft after that. Kind of in that lane, there's obviously stuff later on in the summer tied to whether it's PAX or it's Gamescom or whatever else. We'll kind of see how all of that kind of comes together. It's interesting to watch it all kind of come together. People are in chat are just like, wait, what? There's a Paris Games Week? Yeah, after Sony pulled out of E3, they decided that they instead would go and show off some games. They would do a stream that was attached to Paris Games Week. Which, if you've never heard of Paris Games Week before, that's not a weird, there was almost never any meaningful news out of Paris Games Week until Sony decided to kind of make it their spot once they pulled out of E3. And of course, Gamescom is still going to happen in some capacity, and there'll be a kickoff stream for that. So, European-based farming simulators will be represented, I'm sure, in a major way there. And yeah, I don't know. This has been a really strange week. Obviously, last week we were kind of on the heels of the release of Redfall, a forgettable game. Honestly, not the sort of thing that anyone should be talking about a week later, but it is taken on this incredibly outsized place in gaming history. I don't know, but just by virtue of the conversation it is kicked off around Xbox and the Xbox brand. And we'll kind of go over, obviously, Phil Spencer showed up. Good timing on that. I don't know if that was something that they booked in an emergency because they're like, we got to get out there and say something, or if they had already planned on having Phil on. Either way, interesting timing for an interview, and an interesting interview just the same, for a lot of reasons. And we'll get into that in the news for sure. It's so yeah, I don't know. Like it's definitely like I've spent a lot of time over this last week kind of thinking a lot about the console market, or I guess the video game market. Like that's kind of the takeaway here, that if you're and I feel like I have felt this way for a long time, but some people still get caught up in the Xbox versus PlayStation stuff, and that's taken on kind of an interesting new meaning in the wake of all of the Activision merger talk, because obviously Sony came out of the woodwork as hard as they could to try to fuck up that deal. And they so far have succeeded. But obviously the gaming industry is such a larger thing when you take into account, like, there are a lot of games that are just quietly huge, right? And they don't necessarily get a ton of coverage. And when they do, it's usually in the context of like, they are exploiting children over here. Whether that's mobile games or whether it's Roblox, there's just a lot of stuff happening out there. But I think that only underscores what I've been saying about the Xbox brand, and why I talk about it as the Xbox brand and not the future of the Xbox, because the future of the Xbox as a console is certainly a thing that's a conversation to have, but it's like a small fraction of what the overall conversation about Microsoft's gaming efforts really are. And I think that really kind of underscores just kind of where things are at, and as we think about where they're headed down the line, whether that's Nintendo's next moves or whatever else. We'll get into that as we kind of pick apart some of the quotes coming out of that interview. But yeah, on this front, I finally took the plunge. I have acquired a storage locker. We talked a bit about that last week, I believe. I am now paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $180 for a 10x10 locker that I can drive up to and fill full of stuff. And I've only been able to take 2 carloads of things over there. So it's this mostly empty storage locker with like 12 boxes of like Xbox 360 games. Actually, no, I took the 2 boxes of Wii U games over there. There's a handful of Xbox 360 games over there now. There's some 3DS stuff. And then also 2 big boxes, like hardware boxes, one with Atari 5200 stuff, and one with PlayStation 2 hardware. So yeah, the goal is for this to just be a temporary thing, because of all the moves I have to make in the garage and have to, to the stuff I'm trying to do. The ongoing kind of, it's this really fucked up impasse that I'm at right now with a lot of things, where it's like, okay, I need to probably get solar power installed, because the power costs here were already quite expensive, and now that I'm working out of the home, and obviously, it gets very hot and the air conditioning has to be run because these kids will cook if I don't. And, solar power seems like the big thing. So I got a price quote on that, which is a whole lot of money. And then it's like, okay, also I need to move out of the garage. I need to make sure that area is now climate controlled. So any kind of solar power stuff has to take that into account. to free up this room, and get everything out there. And so and then also, so I have to move a lot of things out of the garage, but I have no place to put it because I want to move it into a shed, but getting a shed, like the style of shed I will probably get, will require permits and a lot of other stuff. So that is months away from happening. So I can't afford to wait months. So I have to basically, you know, in order to get anything done, I have to get this storage locker because I need a place to put this stuff. So, so the goal on the other end is to eventually have some kind of external structure that I can use for storage and go that route with it. But yeah, it's just, it's like a bunch of dominoes, but they're all the same size and they're all pointing at each other. And just like, I don't really know what to do first here. So, but first is actually cleaning out the garage because you can't get the batteries for the solar put in if the people can't get to the walls of your garage. So getting the garage stuff moving is kind of the first thing to happen. So yeah, I'm now paying for a storage locker. It sucks. I don't like that I'm doing it. It's annoying. It's close enough that it's not that big of a hassle, but just the like idea of paying to store stuff that is already my stuff, like it's incredibly frustrating. So the idea is to move things into the storage locker that I know I'm going to keep, and then on the other end of that, I will have a bunch of stuff in the garage that I can get rid of, and kind of sift through a little more with a little more room to do so, right? So there's a bunch of weird boxes in there. Like I need to get a bookshelf because there's all my books and stuff are still out there because we got rid of our bookshelves when we moved because they were terrible. They were all fucked up. So I gotta like buy a bookshelf. I got to figure out where in the house are we gonna put bookshelves and all of that. So yeah, there's just a lot of moving pieces, and it's an extreme pain in the ass to get anything done with the schedule that we're on these days. So you know, making moves where I can, trying to get things to get moving. So yeah. So that's kind of been the big change around here. I'm gonna crack this open because I'm thirsty. This is the last of the case of Rise Fuel that I bought. Had 4 flavors in it. This is the last one. Ring Pop Berry Blast. I was never a big Ring Pop guy. It's just they were just a hassle. I don't know. They're just kind of a hassle, right? So So I was never like the biggest like Ring Pop fan. These Rise Fuels also, I guess I have not been the biggest fan of these either. They're okay, they're fine, but they just haven't quite. They've all been missing a little something out of them. But we carry on, and so let's get down to it. Smells like a generic kind of super sweet raspberry-ish kind of thing. Yeah, pretty much smells like a raspberry Kool-Aid kind of flavor here. Let's find out. It's pretty good. That's okay. It tastes like all the other ones. It tastes like all the other Rise Fuels. Like there's a decent flavor to it up front, and then the back of it's just kind of like powdery. I would call it powdery. But drinkable, like that kind of candy raspberry sort of vibe, I suppose. Let's just get this on the list, and then we can get into talking about some video games. Let's see. I don't think it's as good as the Kool-Aid Tropical Punch, which I guess ended up being our highest scoring Rise flavor, huh? Yeah, that makes sense. It's not as good as Bucked Up Energy Gym and Juice. I think we can all agree that it is not nearly as good as Bucked Up Energy Gym and Juice. But it is better than Miami Nights. It is better than the Country Time Lemonade variant of Rise. I would say it's better than Hype Sauce. It's better than the Watermelon Warlord. In fact, I would take it. And you know what? I'm going to say here, this is, we're going to put it right here. What is the full name of this? Rise Fuel Ring Pop Berry Blast. What a great name. You are the water. Someone in chat is saying, 3ox in the chat is saying, I am the Watermelon Warlord. I don't know. I feel like Riff Raff probably has a mixtape somewhere where he's saying he's the Watermelon Warlord. Pulling up in the Raspberry Range Rover. Okay, so that's is what did we just do? Where did it go? Okay, here's the Sunny D. Yeah. So this is our number 41. Our 42 drink here. Rise Fuel Ring Pop Berry Blast. Not as good as the Sunny D. Not as good as the Kool-Aid. But there you go. Congratulations to everyone involved. I was glad to buy that case. I have a lot of. We will open them this week. I have a lot of boxes that came from the P.O. box yesterday. So, and they all shake like they got drinks in them. So, more drinks on the way. Yeah. Let's see here. Let's talk about some video games. I don't know that I have a. This is not video. This is. Yes. We're not going to let this whole thing go, though, because it's like 2.5 minutes. But, you know what? Maybe we will. Yo. Dead Island 2 finally came out after 30 years in development. They had to change engines a lot. It was originally running on Scramble hardware. And then, it got rebooted a couple of times. For a while there, it was running on the Atari System 1 stuff, and then they moved it on to it was briefly in development for Neo Geo, and then it found its way onto. It was like gonna be one of those Naomi 2 carts for a little bit, and there's just a long history of development. It somehow was on Frostbite for a good 6 months there, and the good year and a half on renderware after Frostbite, which you wouldn't think that would happen, but it's just kind of how it all went. And now here it is, Dead Island 2 is finally in stores. I guess it's out on console, so whatever. There's a physical copy of that game somewhere. I guess it is technically in store. And hey, you know what? It's absolutely all right. Played a few hours of it, ended up playing a little bit more after the stream on Friday, and I think that game is pretty good for what it is. It's a little plain. That's probably my biggest issue with the game. Is there's just like they simplified a lot of the combat, and there are aspects of it that are just like I kind of wish that after all this time that there was maybe a bit more going on with this thing, but I guess you could counterbalance that with like, it's a miracle that this game made it out the door at all. So I don't know, that's one of those weird expectation games, right? Where you have to figure out like, what are you expecting? Redfall's maybe a little bit in that same camp. Yeah, I don't know. For a game that seemed like it just was in trouble all along, it's kind of a miracle that it came out at all, and you're like, okay, yeah, this is all right. Yeah, it doesn't have the kind of advanced combat, kind of analog stick swinging stuff that the first game had, which is a bummer, because that was a really neat idea, and kind of it would really help differentiate it from your Dying Lights and such these days. Yeah, maybe they'll add it on later. I don't know if they've announced anything as such, but yeah, maybe they will kind of bring that to the game. Maybe there's like, hey, let's just try to get this game out in one piece and then see where it goes. And I think it's general joke of, hey, it's people in Los Angeles sure are fucking vapid, like wears thin real fast. Like real fast. Like in the introductory moments of that game, it's just like, oh my God, please fucking stop. So that's a bit much. They lay that on quite thick right out of the gate and don't stop from what I've seen so far. But yeah, it's but also it works and it runs okay, and that's nice in an era when you can't necessarily guarantee that, especially on the PC, that a video game is going to work anymore. That's kind of a faint praise, I know, but that's just kind of where we ended up. But I do think it looks nice. It plays well enough, and you can mod the weapons to put electricity on them, and there's a lot of elemental stuff at play where they've got gas cans and they've got water cans, and you can use water to join sources of electricity to other ends of wires. You can use gas cans to start fires. There's some neat stuff around that I thought was it's janky in the way that, like, you kind of want systems like that to be, right? Because you want to be able to feel like you're stumbling into something a little bit, and you're, oh man, it's weird that this worked, but I sure did set a really weird zombie trap, and now they're all on fire and also electric, and that's kind of neat. Like they when it all comes together, Dead Island 2 is pretty cool. But also, I think a lot of the character work and a lot of the setting and stuff, I think the way they play it is really kind of crappy. There's one part though that I thought was incredibly well done, even in light of it also kind of playing into the kind of empty-headedness that people associate with Southern California, which I associate with Southern California, by the way. Like I'm not saying that they're wrong per se. I live just far enough away from Los Angeles proper that I don't know that I get so much of that around here, but there is one mansion that you kind of stumble into, and it's like a hype house. It's like a streamer house. It's like it's like people are putting on TikTok videos and all these other horrible fucking shows there. But of course they're all zombies now or whatever. And every aspect of it is super shitty in the douchiest way possible, of just like, all right, here's the area where they've got their foosball tables and their extreme sport, this and that. It's like it's a very funny twist on the kind of empty-headed LA kind of thing. And there's one area upstairs that someone I almost missed, that someone pointed out, like, hey, you should go upstairs, when I was streaming it. And it's literally like a camera or like a laptop or whatever, and next to it is a whiteboard with an apology written out on it. Just like, I just want to apologize to my fans and my sponsors, and like, start crying here is written into the script. And you're just like, yeah, okay, yeah, good. You nailed it. They absolutely nailed it. So I thought that was a pretty good, pretty good. So when they nail it, but also they lay so much of it on so thick with, like, one of the first characters you meet is a movie star and her assistant, and everything about her assistant is just like, this guy is worse than the zombie. Maybe the humans were the Walking Dead all along. But that whole thing, that old saw. I guess it's nice that Dead Island 2 is out, and it's nice that Dead Island 2 came out and it is absolutely competent. And I don't know that I'm like super excited by it. It's like, it's cool. I will perhaps stick with it and put some more hours into it. I'm not sure. Like the gameplay aspect of it, I was kind of getting a little, it was wearing a little thin, as much as it does have some kind of cool moments. I'm like, it would be nice if they changed it up a little bit. So I'm not really sure. It was one of those cases where it's like, you get more moves and you get a drop kick that's pretty good. but I wanted more, and maybe this is a case of like the game's troubled development or just how long it was in development, because I know they restarted it at some point, but like the level of interaction you have with the environment is very low in terms of just, you know, physics stuff of like knocking things off of shelves. Also, it's very inconsistent where like when you see a computer monitor, you can usually knock that off a shelf, but other things next to it you can't. And some pottery is breakable and some isn't. And there's just a really weird lack of consistency with that. And I wish that a lot more stuff was breakable. And maybe this is something that later on in the game you encounter more of. I don't really know, but you get a drop kick, and I drop kicked a zombie up against a door, and I was like, man, you know what would have been fucking awesome is if I drop kicked that zombie through that door. That would have been the livest, hypest, craziest thing. I'd be like, fuck it. Like that would have been, if that had happened, I would have been like, I'm playing this whole game. But it needs more physics, more stuff, more dynamism, if you will. It just if it had a little bit more dynamic feel to the world instead of it being incredibly rigid, where it's just like, okay, there are these windows you can break, and then there's this that doesn't move, and then there's this. It's just there's some inconsistency there with some of that I wish that there was more of. In that game in particular, I know that like I think we've maybe overdone the physics game thing. The everything moves all crazy and you know you're blasting stuff all over the place. Like we've had a lot of that's been a thing for a while now. And so I don't, necessarily think that necessarily is going to make or break a game per se. But I wish that we had more of it here. I wish that there was more going on within the environment. I think that would be fun. Especially, like, yeah, what if you could pick up more objects and fling them at zombies or whatever. There's some things you can and some things you can't. But yeah. Overall, kind of nice. I think when you start to back that out into like, hey, do you want to pay $70 for this thing? I think that becomes a little bit of a, man, I don't know, like saying it out loud like that is like, I don't know if you want to pay $70 for damn near anything. But I don't know. We'll see. And then I ended up, streaming some Redfall and playing, and playing a little bit more of that. Since we spoke on the podcast last week, you've probably been Redfalled out, and we'll spend some more time talking about it. But I did spend a little bit more time with that since we last spoke here on a Tuesday, and it's just a very empty kind of lifeless video game. And I guess like it's kind of the only conversation I want to really have about that is kind of around expectations. And we talked about it a little bit with Dead Island 2, about how with Dead Island 2, man, like that's a miracle that game came out at all, right? So, but I think some people are looking at Redfall and going, oh, people just don't like it because it's not like an Arcane game, or it's not like, because it's not an immersive sim the way Arcane's games are. And I guess the only thing I really want to say is, no. Like, I guess my expectations going into that game were pretty flat insofar as I did not think it was just another one of Arcane's games. And I also would say that I wasn't really sure what Redfall was until the last time they showed it off pre-release, and that was like when it kind of locked in. I was like, oh, it's kind of a loot shooter. Like you're gonna be finding guns, you're gonna be finding loot and equipping different guns with different levels and stats. And like, okay, so it's kind of like that then. And so that is the game it is. So I feel like going into it, I had a pretty good idea of what game it was going to be. Also, I guess like that, it's kind of my way of saying like, I'm mostly indifferent about the type of game that Arcane normally makes. Like Dishonored specifically, I just could never get into the Dishonored games. They're really neat, but I just don't enjoy them. Like Prey was really good, but Dishonored specifically, I'm just like never, not really into those things at all. On paper, amazing, incredible. You look at it, you're like, oh, that's so cool. That's so awesome that they did this. I have zero enjoyment like playing them. The weird blink teleport always felt like the jankiest thing in the world that never went where you wanted it to go. It's just, anyway. So I guess like that is the only reason I'm bringing that up is to basically say like people that are trying to write off Redfall by saying like people are just pissed because it's not another Dishonored. No. And also to say that like, and this is some of the stuff that I think even Phil Spencer got into a little bit, which is he went down some weird paths in that interview that are like interesting and fascinating, but also sometimes from a media training perspective, you're like, I can't believe that he got in front of a microphone and said those words out loud, but interesting. But I guess my point is patches are not going to fix Redfall. They will improve the performance on it. They will get it in a better state than it is technically. They may make some gameplay tweaks and whatever else, but like the problems that game has I don't think that they're going to magically pull that one back from the brink and make it into something that people are super excited about. You know, I think they'll look at it and go like, oh well, yeah, okay, it runs. Like, okay, yeah, it runs at 60 frames per second on console now. I guess we got that. But I really don't think that I don't think that you're gonna fix Redfall to that degree. I think you're gonna get Redfall to a point where you're like, yeah, okay, yeah. If this is the game you wanted it to be, then like you know, this is still not fun. I think even you know, like if they could combat the empty environments by putting more zombies on the streets and stuff like that, like would that be an improvement? I guess, but would that make it suddenly? Would that add a double-digit number of points to a review score? No, it would not. No, I do not believe it would. So. Yeah, I don't know. That's it for Redfall. It's taken on this outsized importance that it simply does not deserve, and I mean that in like poor Redfall does not deserve having all of this stuff hung on it that just suddenly got hung on it. If it probably, I feel like coming out of that interview, if you were someone who worked on Redfall, you're like, what the fuck? Like, why? I mean, okay, yeah, it was maybe rough getting it out the door, but Jesus Christ, why are you, what do you do? Why are you saying, it's become a kind of fucking crazy situation. Yeah, M Savo in the chat says, Redfall has just reminded me, as a publisher, Bethesda is incredibly inconsistent. Yes. Bethesda put out Wet. Bethesda put out Rogue Warrior. Like, you know, it's hearkening back to those days when Bethesda would put out some games that you're just like, geez. But also Bethesda stopped doing that. You know, in the wake of that, Bethesda was like, oh, we're fucking not going to do this anymore. We're just going to, Todd Howard is going to build a team, and that team's going to build some games, and we'll do some other stuff around the edges of that. But we're just going to go by id, and you know, we'll do whatever. But yeah, I also, yes, I don't think Bethesda as a publisher, but also as a developer, I don't think there's any, I just be like fucking unpopular opinion, fucking hour or whatever. But like, they do not belong on a pedestal. Like the games that everyone loves Bethesda for ship in really fucked up states. I feel like the last time that was acceptable was Skyrim, and they've put out a lot of games since then. Not a lot, but they've put out enough games since then. You just go like, this shouldn't be like this anymore. So yeah, it's, you know, you look at something like a Fallout 4. Fallout 76 is kind of a weird situation where it's not purely that studio, but also whatever. It's got the Fallout name on it. It's like them trying to make an online Fallout game. My understanding is that Fallout 76 has actually improved quite a bit. I don't know if it's any good or not. Also, Elder Scrolls Online is apparently like a pretty good time if you're still out there playing it. But yeah, you know, like Skyrim was awesome, and the thing that made it matter. Well, whatever. A lot of things made it matter. A lot of things gave Skyrim legs, but one of those things is an incredibly deep and rich mod scene. You know, one of the biggest things that kind of kept Skyrim in the conversation for as long as it was that it had a ton of mods and a lot of really amazing user created things. That then Bethesda tried to monetize in a weird way that made everyone pissed off all over again. So it was like, even in that situation, Bethesda found a way to like muscle their way into the middle of it and make it shittier. But whatever. This is also not like some weird like crap on Bethesda moment either. I think that like they make ambitious things that I wish worked better. Like I would love for Skyrim, fucking Starfield to come out and be amazing. Like, that'd be great if that game came out and it worked exactly as you hoped it would and was a Skyrim-esque game, but sci-fi in space, but also not just Outer Worlds, because that's kind of already doing that in a fun, smaller way or whatever. You know, yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to seeing more Starfield next month, and well, I don't know. I'm really looking forward to everything Microsoft has to say in the next month or so, because of how I really feel like that, you know, the 1-2 punch, and it shouldn't even be a 2, but it ended up being one, but the 1-2 punch of the UK coming down on the Activision deal and the release of Redfall is really just like, what the fuck is going on over there? Like, it's turned things into like that. Things feel dire. It doesn't feel like they actually are. I think if you logically look at the situation, it doesn't seem like something that is legit full on like, oh my God, everything's on fire over there. But you just look at it and go like, these two things really fucking poorly timed. And like, they're in a pretty rough spot. I guess it highlights that like, hey, by the way, Microsoft has kind of been in a really tough spot gaming wise for a while now. And now we've got a bunch of fresh quotes out there from them saying like, yeah, nothing we're going to do is going to change that. It's like, okay, like I get what you mean, but also Jesus Christ. So yeah, I don't know, man. Let's get into the news here. Good news, everyone. The price on the external Xbox Series X storage add-ons has come down. I've got all the latest Xbox news right here. Video Games Chronicle is reporting this. I guess this ended up showing up on Twitter. Remember these things? They're the little memory card looking things that you jam into the back of an Xbox instead of just plugging in a hard drive. They're selling these things in different sizes. I think I ended up with a 1 terabyte version of this. But they do sell a 2 terabyte. I didn't know that came out. But they also have a 512 gigabyte one. Those prices have gone down like decently. I'll say the 2 terabyte used to be $400, and now it's $280. That's still a lot of goddamn money. But that's better than it was. The 1 terabyte goes from $220 to $150, which is a decent drop for like a good amount of storage. I feel like throwing an extra terabyte into those consoles, both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X, has put me in a position where I don't have to like think about storage as much. It's not a case of like every time I want to install a game, I have to uninstall 4 other games. Like that's been a good middle ground, but that's also incredibly expensive. And I'm sure that going with that custom form factor has not really helped. Whereas, yeah, it's funny when they announced all this stuff, it was like, that's a really, easy thing for users. They can just buy it and jam it in the back and they're done. Look at the PlayStation 5. You got to crack that thing open and put a drive in it like it was a goddamn PC. That's ridiculous. But now you're like, oh yeah, but those drives are way fucking cheaper because they make them in much larger quantities for more than just an Xbox. I'm sure that helps. That's probably not the only reason, but yeah. The 512 is $90 now. It was $140. Those are decent drops. Those are substantial price cuts on those things. So if you are an Xbox owner and you're looking to expand your storage of like native storage, modern games, not backwards compatible stuff that can run off an external drive, those prices have come down. I almost wonder. So like, I guess the direct storage API has been getting more and more updates on the PC side of things. If you remember, Forspoken came out, and supported direct storage, and it didn't seem like it benefited hugely from being installed on a direct storage compatible drive, but it did improve the load times. And I guess that as that API has been updated, now it is available to a wider variety of drives. I thought I saw something saying like, oh, even if you had a spinning platter, like, regular ass hard drive, you could theoretically use direct storage on that. It just has to cache the entire game, whether that's to RAM or somewhere else or whatever, so that it can benefit from it. And it got me thinking, I wonder if the Xbox Series X would ever be able to take advantage of that in a way that would let you plug in slower drives and still get some of that benefit. And then that got me thinking, yet again, remember when one of the big key selling points for this generation of hardware was really fast load times and instantaneous loads, and you can bypass all of the publisher screens on the PS5. You just hit the button and you're in the game. And I bring this up every few weeks here because it's absolute bullshit. Things have not panned out that way. I don't think the people were lying when they made those claims. I think that it is simply not panned out that way in any way, shape, or form. Particularly on the PlayStation 5 at least has Ratchet and Clank that you could look at and go like, that's neat. Star Wars Jedi Survivor has substantial load times on PlayStation 5. And when you do the thing like that, it's supposed to bypass all of the intro movies and load screens. When you hit the resume activity thing on Jedi Survivor on PS5, it just pushes the buttons for you automatically. Like, you still see the title screen pop up for like a little bit there and then fade away as it goes to automatically load your game. And it's like, that's not what we're doing. That's not what we're supposed to. It was always going to be this way, right? Because it was something that Sony was pushing harder than everyone else. And it was something they're like, oh man, this is going to be incredible. And this is going to be fantastic how fast this loads. And, but all of those games are made by third parties who have to put the game on all of those platforms. And so they're not going to fully take advantage of that, whatever hardware is in the PlayStation 5 that could theoretically facilitate a faster loading game. Third parties are simply not incentivized to do it. They don't care. They don't have to care, and so they don't care. And so it's frustrating, like it's really only first party games, and sometimes not even those on PlayStation 5 that do that. And on Xbox, like, whatever. There's no, I don't even think, I'm trying to think of games that like load instantaneously on Xbox. Obviously they've got their kind of fast resume thing. which I don't trust because it broke enough in the early days of that console's release that I'm just like, and you still hear stories about people going, oh, this is fucked up and this doesn't work here. And this, like I simply, if I could completely turn off the quick resume feature instead of having but I manually close out of games. I manually make sure that I save and quit and do all this other stuff because I don't want to lose progress. Because that stuff is janky. And it seems like it's still janky. Anyway, yeah, I don't know. Those storage add-ons are cheaper now. That feels like such a weird. That feels like a lifetime ago. Me thinking about these external slap-in cartridges on the Xbox Series X for some reason feels like something that is just like a zillion years ago. But that's still a thing. I don't know. I guess that it just speaks to just like, well, what it's really doing is I because all of those games come out on PC, the Xbox Series X does not get a lot of use. I think that's actually part of it. I think if I was using my Xbox console more frequently, I would probably be thinking about that more. But all of those games come to PC, so I kind of just don't, I guess. That's sort of how that worked out. Sony has decided to shut down Pixel Opus, which is the studio that shipped Concrete Genie. This is coming to us from Eurogamer. Prior to that, they shipped Entwined. They started up back in 2014, which is like, that's a longer than I thought it was. But Concrete Genie hit in 2019. And basically the Pixel Opus Twitter account kind of tweeted about it and said, "Dear friends, our Pixel Opus adventure has come to an end. As we look to new futures, we wanted to say a heartfelt thank you to the millions of passionate players who have supported us in our mission to make beautiful, imaginative games with heart. We are so grateful." That's, and Sony gave a statement to IGN. PlayStation Studios regularly evaluates its portfolio and the status of studio projects to ensure that they meet the organization's short and long-term strategic objectives. As part of a recent review process, it has been decided that Pixel Opus will close on June 2nd. Yeah, Concrete Genie was a good-looking, weird game. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that it was like my favorite thing in the world. Like it was looked cool. But it kind of goes on this constant, this slow trek that the PlayStation Studios brands have been on of like shutting down the parts of the company that were making cool looking weird stuff. Whether it was the Japan studio stuff that is, shutting down the Liverpool operation that was potentially theoretically responsible for Wipeout, the slow shuttering of Dreams, whatever happens next with Media Molecule, we'll see. That Sony is chasing after this guy. I guess it seems like this kind of two-pronged approach, right? Where I guess if you take what they've been saying and go like, oh, that's the only thing they're going to be working on, we're probably going to see more of the kind of marquee franchise third-person action-adventure games that Sony has become known for. And then also the other objective of, we're going to have 12 live service games. And like, I guess that seems like where they're going to go. And anything that isn't aligned with that is gone. Or not anything, but like maybe a lot more of it. And I get why you would say, hey, we need to have some live service games in our portfolio. Of course, that's modern gaming. Especially if you're doing a multiplayer type of game that isn't purely just competitive multiplayer. Like, yes, make a game and dedicate some people to update it all the time. That's not the craziest idea in the world. It's, in fact, when done well, Some of the biggest games in the world do that. So yes. You know, one of the exciting things about PlayStation when they first burst onto the scene in the mid 1990s is that what came with them were a whole lot of new games and new ideas and new styles of game, because again, you know, polygonal gaming was still relatively nascent at the time, but you saw a variety of stuff that was just like, this is quirky. There's a lot of variety here. There's a lot of really interesting things here. And as the PlayStation stuff solidified, you saw a good mix of those kinds of games coming out of Japan. And then in the US, you had all of the 989 Studios stuff where you were just like, I don't know, we got some fucking off-road racing games. We got this ATV game. We got this. We got that. Oh, this takes advantage of the DualShock controller. And isn't it cool that this rally racing game, uses these analog sticks and vibrates this way, Rallycross. And, you know, like there was just Jet Moto, you know, there was just a lot of variety across the board. And Sony burst onto the scene in a way that seemed like adult maybe isn't the word, but like not talking down to its audience. In the UK they were advertising in clubs and raves, and you know they were chasing after a much different audience than the other gaming companies were, and they did it with a credibility that was very interesting. You know, that helped them, because, you know, any new player in the scene, especially Sony, you know, after we'd seen the CDI and the 3DO and some of this other bullshit come and go, it was very easy to look at Sony and be like, what the fuck do they know about games? The same way when Microsoft got in and with the Xbox, it was just like, these fucking clowns don't know what the fuck they're doing. Sony kind of sidestepped a lot of that just by having a quirky lineup. And you know, they kind of grew into it from there. And I don't know, like whatever, the business has changed. I can sit here and lament like the PlayStation 1 days, and I certainly will, week in, week out, for the rest of my fucking life. It's, you know, I can't escape it. But I guess like I can say, like, I understand why they don't necessarily do as much of that, because gaming is just a lot different now. But it is sad that a company as large as PlayStation can't find ways to do both. And you know, not that this entire initiative or this entire concept of quirky games lives and dies with Pixel Opus, but it's more that it's kind of this ongoing trend of any place you saw smaller, quirkier games coming out with the PlayStation logo on it, they seem to be going around and slowly snuffing that stuff out. And we will see, you know, like they'll make some announcements here pretty soon, and you know, we'll see if they have anything that's smaller, or if they're really just going to be all in on you know, the prestige television of games, or whatever the fuck you want to call it, you know, that stuff. Because I don't find that stuff particularly, like, you know, whatever, it's selling quite well for them. So like, again, from a business perspective, you look at it and go like, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. And live games is a potential, you know, blind spot for them that they should probably grow into. And you're like, yeah, okay, yeah, I get it. Like on paper, you look at it and go, yeah, sure, of course. But it's a bummer. That's the problem. The whole thing is just a bummer. It feels bad. And it just, I don't know, like it takes away just a little bit of the soul of PlayStation's games and brands and everything else when you don't have that kind of small layer kind of filling in some gaps along the way. That's kind of like the one thing that Microsoft's been doing pretty well with its, you know, whether you got like something like a Pentiment, Hi-Fi Rush, probably even put Grounded in there to a certain extent. But they should, Sony should be out there occasionally making a new Patapon. I mean, I would say Sony should be out there occasionally making something with Parappa the Rapper in it, but I know that some of the rights around that got weird. So yeah, yes, Vib Ribbon is an amazing example of like inventive, exciting, weird Sony, and yeah, Loco Roco. Like maybe Sony needs a handheld. Maybe that's the thing that lets them experiment and get weird, is when they have a handheld. They just for some reason have no idea what to do with it, and they're just like, I don't know, man, fucking make some fucking quirky, goofy shit and put it out on this thing. But I don't think they'll do that either. Little bit of Mortal Kombat news. This is not, I don't know. Well, we'll start with the movie. Apparently Karl Urban is your Johnny Cage for the next Mortal Kombat film. That is a story from, I guess, therap.com, where they have said that he is in final talks, but then I guess the producer of the Mortal Kombat movie retweeted that story, which that wouldn't, I mean, if you weren't going to do that, he would not be out there retweeting that news if that was not something that was practically a done deal. Yeah, Karl Urban's fine. He could do it. You probably need a stand-in for the splits and stuff. I think it is... sure, yeah, they could have gotten The Miz to play Johnny Cage. Like, yeah, he would have been really good at doing that. But if this is the lead actor in this film, hey, I know he was in The Marine, like 4 and 5 or whatever, and some other stuff, but the Miz is probably not you probably don't put him, he's probably not ready to be the lead actor in a non-WWE produced film. I don't think the industry is ready to let him do that. Right? But I do think he would be good at doing that, because I think a lot of the Miz's on-screen character in wrestling is not entirely dissimilar from Johnny Cage. Smarmy, shitty, fuckboy Johnny Cage. I think he would be really good for that. But I get why they wouldn't go that route. Karl Urban is kind of a weird, I don't know, like when I think about like who would you get to play Johnny Cage, Karl Urban is not a name that would come up, but like, sure, he could probably, he could shave. Right. I don't know. He'd probably be okay. He'll be fine. But I don't know that he can play like the movie star dickbag that you kind of want out of a Johnny Cage. But hey, maybe they're going a different direction with the character. I think about like I'm like, oh right, yeah, they're gonna make another one of those Mortal Kombat movies, and I maybe I should go back and watch that previous one again. That might be one of the last movies, one of the last like recent release films I saw was the last Mortal Kombat movie. Now that I think about it, that might be one of the last. But that movie was fine. I don't know. That movie was, I guess, in the pantheon of like, when you think about the other Mortal Kombat films and you think about most video game movies in general, though maybe that's a different conversation these days on the other side of Mario making all of that money or whatever. It's pretty good. It's totally fine. I watched it and went like, yeah, okay, cool. Like, could you pick it apart in a way that would make you incredibly frustrated if you liked the games? Of course. There's a bunch of stuff in there that I'm like, oh, that's not, I don't know. I think and I actually tend to think that the Mortal Kombat video games had a better story mode than this Mortal Kombat movie did. But it's fine. You look at it and go like, yeah, okay, yeah. You make some adjustments to make it work better as a film, and totally whatever, man. It's better than the other. It's better than Mortal Kombat Armageddon. But that wouldn't take much. The other bit of Mortal Kombat news is not. Hey, they're gonna make another Mortal Kombat movie, and they're gonna make another Mortal Kombat game. I don't know if you heard. They're going to keep making Mortal Kombat video games. They put out, because this is the 30th anniversary of Mortal Kombat, which is fucking nuts. But I guess like makes sense. Like that. I guess that is I have come to the realization over the last year or so that I have been doing this for 30 years. And so, yes, when I think about how Mortal Kombat 1 came out shortly after I started going to trade shows and started kind of getting out there and doing things, like, yeah, I guess it makes sense that Mortal Kombat is also 30 years old. So yeah, they put out a video message of them going like, oh, thanks for 30 years of Mortal Kombat. And, they ended it with like, and we're not done yet. And then there's practically nothing. What they showed is an hourglass zooming in on a grain of sand, and then the grain of sand explodes. And you're like, okay, yeah, that's, if you think about the end of Mortal Kombat 11, when you think about the end of Aftermath and where that left the universe, all this says is, hey, yeah, we recognize that at the end of that game, we basically blew up the entire fiction. Or at least what they did is they put themselves in a position where they could go anywhere. Not unlike Saints Row after Saints Row 4. But they yeah, if you don't remember, that game basically ended, there's like light variance on the endings depending on how you did it, but it's basically like, oh, Liu Kang now has the ability to reshape time and space as he sees fit, and he is basically rewound all the way back to the start of creation, and now what happens? You're like, could be fucking anything. I look at that as an opportunity for them to basically you have to think about this now as like, so okay, if we take this hourglass exploding grain of sand thing as an acknowledgement of that storyline and saying that they are going to continue forward from that point, which is really the only sensible thing I think they would do, it gives them tremendous opportunity, tremendous leeway to rethink a lot of the characters, a lot of the, you could do a lot with the lore and fiction, but not so much. I think what they end up doing, and what they'll probably end up doing, is it's kind of almost like another chance for them to reboot it again, which is not the worst thing in the world, because when they rebooted it with MK9 and the trilogy of games that followed, they fucking nailed it. They absolutely, like, you could say, oh, I didn't like the storyline in 10 or whatever, and I get you. Some of the stuff they did with the focus on new characters and stuff did not hit as hard as you wish it did. But 9 being a reboot of the first 3 games of that trilogy, and then them kind of going forward in different directions with the kind of Combat Kid stuff in 10, and then balancing that out in 11 in ways that helped it make a lot more sense and be a lot more entertaining. Really, the only thing they can do here at this point is reboot again. And that's great, because fighting games are stuck in time. I don't know if you've noticed, but fighting game characters have to be young forever. They have to fucking, like, they have to all do the same shit forever. You have to find ways to reboot it yet again to retell the same stories, because Ryu is still fucking Ryu. Ken is still fucking Ken. They can spin that story forward a little bit, and they are. Like, I don't know, man. Ken got into fucking cryptocurrency and fucking fighting esports tournaments, and he's a dumbass. And you're like, okay, yeah, cool. But at the end of the day, he does the fucking hurricane kick and he does the dragon punch. And, it's like there's like stuff that is kind of locked in, right? And they can't break free. So the idea of a reboot that lets them fucking come up with another storyline reason as to why these characters never fucking break free makes a ton of sense. But also, they get to respin things in potentially interesting ways. And Street Fighter doesn't do it in a reboot sense. They do, the Street Fighter story has been the most convoluted thing. In some ways, the storyline in Street Fighter 6 and its place in the timeline of Street Fighter games makes it even more interesting, because it is kind of the first time in a long time that they're able to go like, hey, yeah, Bison's, it's not a thing, like we're moving past, like they are, opening up potential there in a different way. But with Mortal Kombat, this gives them positions where they can have new twists on old characters that are like fun winks and nods. They can kind of like, this is the character that does Scorpion's moves now, but it ain't Scorpion. There's like, oh, in this timeline, this character learned this from this master instead of going the other way with it, and so now we've got different situations there. I think I would love, and I've said it before, I'm just going to put it out there again, Scorpion should be a lady. They should do that. They should be like, I don't know, in this timeline it just happened that way. I don't know, the lady got killed and she's a hell demon. Weird, right? It's fucked up. What can she do? She throws a spear and she says, get over here. She fucking does a teleport punch. Maybe she does the thing where she throws her hands up and fire appears under the fucking guy. I don't know. I don't think you need that, but if you want to do it, I guess. I think that that is maybe a dumb example or a simple example, but I guess I just think about it in terms of like, yeah, okay, maybe Raiden's just a fucking dude because he's not God anymore. And so instead of being the God of Thunder, he's just some guy, and him and Kung Lao are hanging out because now Liu Kang is the fucking Thunder God or whatever you got, So when you think about when you think about that as like a baseline for what changes, when you think about it as a baseline for like, oh, Liu Kang is a god now and Raiden is not. I'm like, okay. Well, that throws it all, like that throws everything into disarray. It lets them do a lot of different shit if they wanted to. Yes, Pat. Yes. What if there were 3 Sub-Zeros? And also it very much gives them an opportunity to set that game in a different timeline. Like the games have traditionally been relatively modern times, and especially the last trilogy. It's obviously like fucking weird robot tanks and all this shit in the backgrounds and whatever else. But if they wanted to, they could have this game take place hundreds of years prior to, because they're spinning up a new tournament, they're spinning up a new universe or whatever. And so you could do that in a way. It's like a BioShock-esque sort of thing of just like, well, there's always a tournament, there's always Outworld, there's always the fate of the realms hangs in the balance. That is always going to happen. But how that happens and when that happens, of course, it happens over and over again every 500 years, whatever the fucking lore is. Every 500 years, they've got to come together and have the tournament. I don't remember the exact time frame on the tournaments or whatever, but they could set this game thousands of years earlier if they wanted to. I don't think that would be nearly as interesting, because I like the kind of modernish. I like that you can have a guy that has a fucking gun, I guess, is as dumb as that move is. I like that you can have a movie star, I guess, is the thing there. So if you set it, is Johnny Cage suddenly like a radio drama actor or or something like that. I don't know. And do they put, you know, I don't think they will. They could. But what if they put this Cole guy in it from the movie? I don't think they will. But I guess anything's possible. So, like, to me, that sounds like fun. And maybe they've got a totally different idea about where they want to take it, and everything I'm even saying is fucking nonsense. But to me, the idea of finding ways to ensure that it still feels like Mortal Kombat and checks all the boxes from a character and concept point of view, while also changing up a lot of things along the way. I feel like I've been saying for the past couple of games, and they did add it as an option, right? But I think they should have a female announcer, a really tough sounding, which they did in the last one. They had like announcer toggles, right? I thought that would always be kind of cool, more sinister. But yeah, I don't know. Like maybe they're going in a totally different direction. But like I guess I just think about it as like, with where they left off the last game, what's the obvious next step for them? At least from that angle of like, what do we do with the characters? What do we do with the you know, what do we do with the universe and whatever else? But yeah, Chronica was an unlockable announcer in the last game, so you could swap that on if you wanted to. I just thought it was a nice change of pace, you know? Like, they've made so many of them. Like change things up, have fun. Make a really sexy Scorpion. What? Just do it. Just with this Hell Demon. Anyway. And I guess the other thing is like, what do they do to the gameplay? Obviously, that's the and that's something that, you know, you can't really tease in a fucking little trailer or whatever. But make Scorpion's ass clap when she walks. Oh. Sorry, I went blind there for a second. Yeah, you know, again, I won't lay out my fucking, I won't pull the chart out and the stick and point at it, but like they've, you know, this is the time for them to probably start making more dramatic changes to the gameplay. And I'm very curious to see if they do it, because I also think they've hit upon a pretty good thing. And if they change up the gameplay in the wrong way, that could be a bummer. So I'll be curious to see what they do with the actual video game part of the video game when it comes to different systems and whatever else. That there's just kind of you know, different stuff you could do there. Guest character wishes for the next game, asks chat. I don't know. I'm not that interested in guest characters. I never really have been. I think that the actual, I care more about the actual Mortal Kombat characters than I do about any of these fucking guest characters. So, like, I think Scorpion is more interesting than any of the characters they have brought in to be guest characters or whatever else. Like, what Warner Brothers characters could you put in there? Like, assuming they probably have to be Warner Brothers characters, because the head of Warner Brothers is out there talking about all of the amazing synergy that they could be laying into LeBron James. Put LeBron James in it. So yeah, I don't know. We'll see where it all goes. You know, is Shang Tsung a good guy? Like, I think there's a lot of like really almost corny sort of things you could do with the storyline, where you go like, yeah, fuck it, man, Shang Tsung's a good guy now, and because why not? But yeah, we'll kind of see where it all goes. I'm just gonna take a look here. I'm sorry. I'm just getting like a zillion emails here. I've got a lot of emails to respond to. So, as we said at the top of the show, Redfall came out and all hell broke loose. No part of Redfall deserves this level of hell to break loose, but that is sure how it ended up going. This led to, or I guess like actually it sounds like that maybe they had this lined up ahead of time, and so it was just like amazing timing. But Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, the head of gaming at Microsoft, including the Xbox brands as well as all of the other studios and everything, appeared on Kinda Funny. Greg Miller and those folks. Well, I guess he was not on the show itself. It was on they have an Xbox podcast because they do platform specific shows over there because they came from IGN where that was a normal thing to do. Anyway, they have an Xbox podcast. I believe Gary Whitta is on it. And Phil Spencer appeared on the show just after all of this stuff happened. And so incredible timing for all of this. And gosh, there's a lot here. This is all, a lot of this stuff has all been picked apart. I started listening to the show and I have not listened to the full show myself just yet, but I've listened to some chunks of it. And then also, every news organization is picking that thing apart. And so I have gone through and pulled out some of the kind of choice stuff said in there. But I will say, from what I have heard of it, you should go listen to that interview. It's an interesting. I've seen in the wake of that one or two people saying, "Hey, maybe he shouldn't have done this." But it's I don't know that I necessarily agree with that. But I think that all right, look, my read on Phil Spencer is someone who has talked to him over the years. My read on him is that he very genuinely does care about the stuff that he says he cares about. That is not necessarily a front. Obviously, he's also running a business and like doing all of that too. So you kind of have to factor that in there. The thing I've heard over the years, and this is kind of older stuff at this point, but it kind of put some of this in perspective. The thing you hear about a lot, and this is something before Phil Spencer was in the job, before we was in this position, and you still hear about it, is that Microsoft people are Microsoft people, and they operate in a very like that. The Microsoft environment leads to people just thinking about things a certain type of way and charging forward and not really stopping to think about what, what do the users think about, that there's this kind of, I'm trying to think of the right way to put it. People have referred to it as a cult, in a lot of ways. I think a lot of companies get that moniker on them, but I don't mean it in that particular way. Jay Allard called it the tribe. But they definitely get in a bubble of sorts, and that Microsoft is just used to like, well, this is how we do things because we're Microsoft. This is what we can get away with because we have to think about our business in this way because it's Microsoft. And there's a lot of bureaucratic things that usually have to be, people have to be mindful of when kind of operating in that environment. That's always been what I've heard about what it's like to work there. I haven't heard that so much these days, but that's not because it's not there anymore. It's just I just haven't updated that information, right? But it was something that you always heard about the way Microsoft ran, is that they would make a decision and go with it. And you could go to them and say, "Hey, this policy you have is fucking me over." And they would be like, "That's a policy." policy's there for a reason. Obey the policy. That's kind of my take on it. Now, sometimes those policies impact third-party developers. Policies like, oh, if you're going to bring your game out on Xbox after you brought it out on PlayStation, you need to add something exclusive for us. You need to have a reason, like the policies that probably don't exist anymore, but in the early days of Xbox One may have been in place. Now, the thing I have always heard about Phil Spencer and the way that the Xbox business is run in much ways that a lot of the Microsoft business is run, and I'd love to talk to him about this sometime, probably will here at some point here, is that there's a shell around him, or there's a shell around even just the leadership team to a certain extent, of people who are used to being, yeah, the policy's the policy. I'm not going to be the one that takes it up the chain. And so if you can get through that and get to Phil and say, hey, man, this is bad for me, a third-party external developer. This thing is, can we get an exception here that 10 times out of 10 he does the right thing? That he is like, oh, yes, this is crazy. We need to not do this. We need to rethink this. And so there's a lot of, and I don't know how much of that is still there, because obviously he's been in the chair for a good long time now. But when he was first coming into the role, there was a lot of bullshit policy around him in terms of around Xbox. I'm not going to, of like, this is the way they do things, because they built all these policies when they were on top with the Xbox 360, and then they didn't get away from them fast enough when the Xbox One came out and tanked. But that generally speaking, they all want to do what's right, not only for players, but also for the industry and developers and whatever. And so there's been this kind of constant chipping away at those policies and those other things. But in order to get the ball rolling, you have to crack that shell and get in there and be like, look, this is fucked. And then finally there'll be like wait, how come you didn't tell me that this was still like this? We can't do that. We have to make it. And it almost is probably disruptive to some of the other things that they are trying to get done, because they're dropping everything to fix some brain dead old policy. So that's kind of been my framework for when I think about Xbox, and when I think about the ways that they are trying to fix things, when I think about the ways that they have tried to make things better for people working at Xbox, for people working on games for Xbox platforms, and for people playing games on Xbox platforms. Like, that is the general framework that I'm usually thinking of in the back of my head, of like, yeah, man, like everyone there wants to fucking do the things that are right. Of course, and it's no different at fucking PlayStation in terms of like, people want to do what's right for everyone. Do they have the autonomy to do it? Not always. Can they do it in with the 10 other things that they're focusing on? Not always. But I tend to think about things with Microsoft and with Xbox in that specific way. That generally speaking, once you kind of get through the layers and get down to let's have an actual human conversation about how this works, that everyone there within is generally pretty sensible about it. They're just dealing with a lot of built up dumb shit over the years, and sometimes people don't always, like fight as hard as they should, and whatever else. And so I think when you see someone like a Phil Spencer in this situation, and you see some of the answers that he's giving in this Kind of Funny interview, like I tend to believe that stuff. Like it's very easy to be very cynical about it and be like, oh, they're just trying to be as hat in hand as possible. And I think that there maybe is some aspect of that, because if you think about it, Microsoft has to appear small. The Xbox stuff specifically has to appear small and non-competitive right now for them to skirt this deal through the UK. If they're going to make this appeal work, they can't be out there going like, we're the fucking biggest and baddest in the world. But hey, good news for them. they're not the biggest and baddest in the world. They're in last goddamn place, which is crazy to think about when you think about where the Xbox 360 was and where things were. Anyway, I just want to say that up front as kind of a framework for like the lens that I tend to be looking through when it comes to this interview and just overall, I think where the Xbox brand is at. Is that I look at that as like, man, yeah, Microsoft culture is over the years has been really rotten for a gaming business, you know, especially a gaming business that has to adapt as things change. Microsoft is not the quickest adapters out there. They never have been. So Eurogamer pulled out this bit, starting with Redfall and kind of the discussion around Redfall, basically saying that Microsoft expected the review scores for Redfall to come in double digits higher than what it got. I have not looked at Metacritic in a very long time. But let's go just check that out real quick. Oh, wow, that's lower than I heard it was. So right now they're sitting at a 55 on PC and a 57 on Xbox. I think when this interview went out, those scores were closer into the 60s, that they were up into the 60s. So that means that they expected the game to get 7s, and it got 6s, or, you know, generally speaking. There's a quote here again from Phil Spencer. It says, "We do mock reviews for every game we launch, and this is double digits lower than we thought we would be with this game. That's one of the disappointing things. We would never strive to launch a game that we thought was going to review in the low 60s. It's not part of our goals." So yeah, my guess is they were probably looking at it and going like, hey, this game ain't great, but it's fine. It's probably like a 7. And maybe they had some mock reviewers that were coming in with mid 7s and stuff like that. So the interesting thing about the Eurogamer story on this is that, well, okay, there's a couple more quotes here. Because he goes on to talk about how, like, you know, because I guess they asked the question, like, well, why didn't you just delay the game? And I think we can, you know, if you've played Redfall, I think you understand that delaying Redfall for another 3 months would not, that's not going to fix Redfall. But Eurogamer specifically says that Redfall had fallen short as it hadn't delivered on Arcane Austin's own creative vision. And the quote here is, a fundamental piece of feedback that we get is that the game isn't realizing the creative vision it had for its players. That doesn't feel like a, hey, just delay it. That feels like the game had a goal to do one thing, and when players are actually playing, they are not feeling that thing. They are not feeling the creative execution of the team. Which I tend to agree with. You know, it's just in like I said, you know, the technical parts, the technical issues that people are seeing with Redfall are not the actual problems. The game, the nature of that game, and how did they get there? I don't know. Like that's not something we go in that we get out of this interview. That's not something did they have to cut a bunch of corners late in development to get it out the door? Did they? Like, what is it about that game that they thought it was going to be that it's not? Because I look at it and go like, okay, there are technical aspects of it in terms of how they built the co-op part of that game that are behind the times. You know, things like jump in, jump out co-op. So did the engine that they were using, was it just not able to handle that? Is it Unreal? I don't actually know what engine that game's on. Is it, you know, what is it about that game that they could not get the co-op stuff out the door? You know, yeah, the cutscenes are more motion comic-y than anything else. Is that, you know, maybe that was a creative choice, but maybe that is them going like, we don't have time to get the cinematics where we want them to be. I find that seems like My guess is that was just a creative choice. Because if you think about like the greatest co-op games out there, you skip all that shit anyway because you're on voice chat with friends and who cares. So, getting a cutscene in there that's just like, I don't know, we got to go to the fire station and shoot zombies or vampires, whatever. I like that stuff maybe looks a little bit low budget, but I could see them doing that and not having it, and that being more of a creative choice, or just like, hey, we don't want to spend a bunch of money on the cutscenes because we don't think that those cinematics are really where we want to put our resources. And so I don't necessarily look at that as like a major. You don't look at that and immediately go like, oh, that's because games still do that and get away with it all the time. So anyway, I agree. I don't think delaying that game would have moved review scores meaningfully. The interesting thing here is that Eurogamer went out and talked to a consultant named Nathan Brown, who writes a newsletter called Hit Points, and gets some quotes from Nathan. Consultants are people that do things like mock reviews. External consultants are sometimes brought in earlier, and they don't just do mock reviews, but they'll be brought in earlier in a process sometimes. The way I've always heard it described is that a lot of times consultants are brought in to try to solve arguments that a team is having. If they're just like, what, we want to go this way or this way, and we don't know which way to go, maybe we need to bring in a consultant and get them to kind of talk us through this and get another set of eyes on this problem and see what they think. Consultants come from a lot of different environments. Some of them are assholes like me that decided to stop being this brand of asshole and started trying to be more of a behind the scenes kind of asshole. They come from a lot of different areas of, a lot of ex-media went in that direction, and more power to them. I think it's an interesting path for sure. And so this happens like not all that often, but it happens. I don't know. Was it like once a generation? You don't hear about it all that often, I guess, but you just once every 4 or 5 years, you hear about a game that mock reviewed way better than it did when it shipped. And you hear stories like, oh yeah, like the 5 people that did mock reviews for this are never going to work for Ubisoft again because of what they said about was Driver Sam. I'm trying to remember. There was a Ubisoft game specifically that the mock reviews were way fucking higher than what came out, and that basically those people did not get hired back, But no, it was not Driver 3. It was way later than that. This would have been... It's probably would have been in the early to mid 2010s. Based on me thinking about who one of the people were who did that review that apparently did not get hired back. But that's whatever. It's a separate story. So this happens, right? Where, sometimes your mock reviewers don't line up with the actual critical takes on the games. And that can probably happen for a variety of reasons. Sometimes they're reviewing games, or they're reviewing games earlier than reviewers are reviewing games. So they are the people that are reviewing games like almost like off the old print review build of like, here's a piece of paper with what we're going to fix. And if they end up not fixing that stuff, then the mock reviews aren't always going to be accurate or whatever. You would think there would be some allowance and some leeway in there for that. But like I said, I have relatively limited insight into the world of mock reviews, as I have never done one. Anyway, they talked to this consultant, Nathan Brown, who gave some interesting quotes here. That gives a little more insight into the process. And says basically, it's certainly very strange. While mock reviewers will typically overlook bugs or minor technical or performance issues because the game is still being worked on and can assume in good faith that they're being fixed, those are not the reason Redfall has reviewed so poorly. The emptiness of the world, the enemy AI, the storytelling, all of those would have been obvious while the game was in development and should have been called out. If we are to take Phil Spencer at his word, clearly Microsoft needs some new mock reviewers. What I find even stranger, this is more quotes from, again, Nathan Brown, who writes a newsletter called Hit Points, and he's a video game consultant. What I find even stranger is the suggestion that Xbox management had no reason to dispute the mock review's findings. I've done dozens of mock reviews, and I don't think I've ever told a developer or publisher something they didn't already know. More often than not, I'm helping confirm suspicions they already hold internally. Did Spencer and his team really have no idea of the shape and state that Redfall was in the run-up to release? I find that very hard to believe, though I suppose it would explain a lot. So, yeah, that's pretty... that's lightly scathing, I guess I would say. And so you wonder, how does that happen? I guess I could say, if I had to guess, let's assume that Microsoft really didn't know the true state of this game. Because again, like, yeah, the idea of a mock review, some mock reviews are done by marketing teams because they want to know if they should spend a bunch of money marketing the game or not, which always was a really weird thing for me. I don't know that mock reviews are always done for those reasons anymore, but that was definitely something you would hear. Bethesda is still run relatively separately from the Xbox game studios. They have not been fully subsumed into that hierarchy in terms of, the reporting lines and whatever else, as far as I know. And I'm basing some of that based on, like, I hear from specific people. When it comes time for an Xbox game to come out and be reviewed, I hear from specific people, and usually there's a specific cadence and timing to when those reviews go up and whatever else. And when it comes to Bethesda, I hear from different people because they have a separate PR firm. They have so like that stuff still exists. Bethesda is not still fully cooked and fully baked into the Xbox Game Studio system. Yes, Laser Ghost Robot says limited integration is what it's called at Microsoft. Yeah, so they are technically integrated into those teams. I'm sure that the reporting line probably at some point the head of Bethesda reports into Phil Spencer, and that's probably it. And so my guess is that that's probably a case where the Bethesda process is running the way that it always did. And, well, okay, probably not anymore. This is probably going to lead to some pretty major changes in ways that almost sound kind of weird on their own. In terms of oversight and whatever else. But my guess is that there's a lot of hierarchy still involved on the Bethesda side, that this process is still their process to manage. And so they probably just told Microsoft, like, hey, yeah, this is, we mock reviewed at 74, whatever it was. And they're like, okay. But maybe the Microsoft mock review process is incredibly different than the Bethesda one and whatever else. And so, it'd be very easy to see something like this falling through the cracks, especially if you are a management team that is trying to fucking figure out everything else. It's not like this is the only thing on their plate right now. Whatever. I'm not going to sit here and give them a ton of outs and excuses or whatever else. I guess my point is, I see how something like this could happen. And I see why they would go, oh, we need to not let this happen like this anymore. Clearly, we need to tighten the reins on some of these studios that we've purchased, even if they don't want to fully merge them into the Xbox Game Studios infrastructure or whatever else, and let Bethesda continue to operate semi-autonomously or whatever. I'm sure they're still like, but we can't get blindsided like this again, because obviously this has huge ramifications, huge fucking, this resonates big when it goes bad. So we have to make sure that we are aware and not surprised, and that we have a handle on this. So there are some other quotes in some of this interview where basically Phil Spencer talks about like, oh, well, clearly we need to, have a closer eye on some of this stuff going forward. And well, that's not the exact quote, but it's basically like saying like, well, it sounds like we need to be involved even earlier in the process and make sure it was like they need to make sure that everyone involved knows what it means to ship a game for Xbox, to ship a first party Xbox game. Which is okay. Yeah, that's interesting. Also, the first party Xbox games have not been all bangers for the past few years. It's not like they're knocking it out of the park with every release, and then this comes out and they're like, oh, these Bethesda guys just don't get it. Like, So this almost sounds like, hey, we need to get involved earlier, and like, how is that going to impact the creativity of these teams? What is that going to mean? Like, that sounds negative. That sounds like a negative change to me. And then, there's a lot of quotes like, a lot of this is, again, with Phil Spencer being the person in charge of this entire operation, the buck stops with him, right? It has to stop with a lot of people, but he's the one with the microphone in his face. And so he also spent some time kind of falling on his sword over this stuff and saying, we let a lot of people down this week. I'm upset with myself. And saying that they're going to continue to work on the game, and they'll get the 60 frames per second thing in here. There's some more quotes from him in here about Redfall, some of which I think applies, and some of which I go like, this is maybe. I'll just say all up, there's nothing that's more difficult for me than disappointing the Xbox community. I've been a part of it for a long time. I obviously work on Xbox, head of the business, have a lot of friends, get a lot of feedback. And just to watch the community lose confidence, be disappointed. I'm disappointed. I'm upset with myself. I revisit our process. I think back to the announcement of 60 frames per second, and then we weren't shipping 60 frames per second. That was our punch on the chin, rightfully, a couple of weeks ago. And then seeing the game come out and the critical response was not what we wanted, and it's disappointing. What can we learn? What can we get better? One thing I'll fight is what went wrong. There's clearly quality and execution things we can do, but one thing I won't do is push against creative aspirations of our teams. There are a lot of people that will say, hey, you've got teams know how to do one kind of game. Just force them to go do the one kind of game they have a proven track record for. I'm just not a believer in that. Maybe that means I'll under-deliver for some of our fans out there, but when a team like Rare wants to do Sea of Thieves, when a team like Obsidian wants to do Grounded, when Tango wants to go do Hi-Fi, when everybody probably thought they were doing The Evil Within 3, I want to give the teams the creative platform to go and push their ability to push their aspirations. But I also need to have a great selection of games that continue to come, that surprise and delight our fans. We under-delivered on that, and for that I apologize. It's not what I expect, not what I want, but it's ours to deliver. It's hard to argue with that. I tend to agree that like the last thing I would want, and I think that, the last thing that the people on these teams would want is to just fucking crank out the same thing over and over again. The Coalition was supposed to be doing something else there for a while, and now it sounds like they're not. So I don't, I don't know what the situation is there, but I tend to agree that I like the idea of these studios stretching out and doing other things, because you need to change it up. You can't just make the same thing forever. It goes stale. And I think if we look at the Microsoft franchises that we think of as the biggest ones, the perennials, that's, you see it. You see it. When was the last time Halo felt like Halo? Reach, right? Is it Reach? So taking 343 and saying keep grinding out Halo, I think, you know, I think that's why you're seeing a lot of folks leave now, is because Halo Infinite was probably their best shot, and it's the best one they've done. And it's so close. Halo Infinite was so close because it's a very good game. But it's not Halo good. And maybe Halo good is not an attainable thing anymore because of how much time has passed and how the shooter market has changed and whatever else. And if the Coalition is really just going to do Gears again, you know, what does that mean? So yes, but also I agree. Like letting Tango do Hi-Fi Rush instead of just, and I, you know, I'll say this as someone who does not think The Evil Within 3 is like a fucking must exist, you know, sequel. It's you know, you're like, oh yeah, you could take it or leave it. Like, yeah, they could do another one of those. I don't know that the first two of those have like blown up. Like, they haven't blown up in a way that you're like, they've got to keep making those. You look at it and go like, oh yeah, they could do that. Maybe they will. But maybe it's time to do something else. Sort of like Playground Games doing a Fable game, you know, and staffing up to apparently do that, you know, instead of just having them crank out Forza Horizon games for the rest of all time. I agree that variety is nice to have when you can have it, but also I agree that when he says, like, we can't just have all these teams out on a lark doing something that's off brand for them just to keep them happy. At the end of the day, we have to keep the customers happy, and we have to make sure that, like, it doesn't matter what the games are. At the end of the day, they could take every franchise they have and throw it away as long as they had fucking bangers to replace them with. They could never make another Forza game again if those people went on to make something that filled that gap from a money perspective, from a surprise and delight perspective, from a, like, a, you know, whatever the portfolio, whatever you want it to be. Like, they could never make another Halo game again as long as they had something else. As long as there was something else that was kind of filling that gap or whatever, right? So I don't know. That's one of those hard problems that I look at and go like, I don't know what the right answer is there, because you want to do right by the people on your teams and prevent them from burning out. You want to have them be able to change it up. If they really believe in a new direction, you want to go with them on that journey. You want to be like, yeah, you guys made all this other stuff that's fucking awesome. Go make something else that's just as awesome, but in a different way. And when they hit it, they fucking hit it. And it's great and everybody's happy. When they don't, then you get all these people going like, this fucker should have just made another Dishonored. They should have done this. You know, all the people come out of the woodwork to say they should have just made a sequel to the thing that they were known for. But I guess my point is, I don't think that the sequel business for Microsoft is in the best shape, right? So yeah. Yeah, Justin in the chat here says, Guerrilla Games took a leap of faith with Horizon and it paid off dividends. Who from Xbox is going to do that? That's a good point. You know, it would have been very easy for Guerrilla to get locked into being the Killzone team forever, though I suspect that part of the reason why that happened is because the last Killzone they made was not as well received. Like, the Killzone franchise was kind of on a downward trend, which kind of proves the point, right? I mean, of like some of these other Xbox sequels are kind of on that downward slope as well, it seems sometimes. So yeah, you know, you would have thought that maybe, like, yeah, there was that talk there that the Coalition was working on a spy game or something that then got killed, and I think there's been some other thing that they were associated with or whatever, but I don't know. Of course, now you have the opposite problem of, like, now Guerrilla is just known as the Horizon Studio, and how long are they going to be that? So, but I mean, there are fucking way worse places to be than to be locked in on another banger ass franchise that probably is doing better for PlayStation overall than Killzone ever did, right? We'd have to go try to line up some money across the years and whatever else, but like, I feel like Horizon is a much better franchise and a much bigger franchise in the overall scheme of things than Killzone ever was. As much as I would be interested to see another Killzone game, like, yeah, whatever. But yeah, I don't know. Like, as he kind of lays out the case, like, I think it really underscores like it's a really hard problem. It's a really hard problem. In terms of like, when do you take people and put them on something new? What is the something new? Coming up with new IP at that scale, at the amount of risk they have to take on to budget for a big game like this, and then have it come out and get high fives and low sixes and all this other stuff. Not that Redfall, I don't know what the budget was for Redfall, and clearly they started it before they were a part of Microsoft, because at one point Harvey Smith was out there saying that they had a version for PlayStation that got that maybe in the with the climate going on out there around the exclusive talk and some of this other stuff that Microsoft is going through with this acquisition, I'm going to guess that they were not thrilled that Harvey Smith got out there and said, yeah, at one point we had a PlayStation version of this and then we killed it. Like, that's probably not great. Bring back, yes, exactly. Zatoichi. Bring back Killzone, just because, and bring back Rico. Let's kill Rico again if we must. Like, just bring back Rico. Sucks. He's the worst character in video games. Fuck that jerk. Ugh. Yeah, so there's just a little bit more here about Redfall here, some quotes here, which says, learning about the quality, and there are clearly, I've seen them, I know there are bugs in Redfall, but when I look at the crash rates on the game, because we get all the telemetry of everything that's happened, it's not out of proportion for a game that has just launched. It's in the pocket of what we would expect. That's not going to deny any of the animation, streaming, or texture bugs. The AI bugs we've seen, we will go work on those. I gotta say, if you are in the department of Arcane that works on that stuff, it's gotta feel real bad to have someone this high up the chain having to call out that specific stuff in an interview. Like this, I can't imagine what this is doing for morale across the board over there. Whether it's at Arcane, but even some of the people in some of the other studios around there have to be like, what the Jesus. When I look at the review, this is more, again, from Phil Spencer, head of Xbox, on the Kinda Funny interview. When I look at the review scores of this game, did we have enough of a creative differentiation in our core idea? And did we realize that creative ambition? I'm a huge supporter of Arcane Austin. Their track record is awesome. I love a lot of the great games they've built. This is one where the team didn't hit their own internal goals when it launched. And this is kind of all part of him kind of saying why the game didn't get delayed any further, and again, I agree wholeheartedly with that pushing this game out 3 months does not fix the game. A little bit more on some of the mock review stuff. This game's significantly below our internal metrics. That's not on anybody but us. We have to own that. In terms of our commitment to the game, absolutely. The team at Arcane is on taking the near-term feedback. We're still working on the 60 frames per second. We have a good timeline for that. We're committed to getting that done, and we're going to continue to work on the game. We've shown a commitment to games like Sea of Thieves and like Grounded to continue to go and build games. This isn't... I don't feel like Redfall is in the same vein as those. I feel like Grounded shipped as an early access game for them. It was designed to be built over time like that. Sea of Thieves was built as a live game that was obviously going to get a ton of updates. Redfall is not either of those things. And so, you know, and then the quote, this is where it starts to, yeah. This is where I start to go like, man, this is a bad spot to be in for everybody over there. But I also know that these games are $70. I'm going to take full responsibility for launching a game that needs to be great. There are still questions that pop every so often of how committed is the company to this category? When are we just going to push Xbox out of the market? There's a lot of Twitter firing of Phil right now, which is fine. I'm way overpaid for the role I have anyway. I get that's my responsibility. And he's, you know, he's kidding around. He's being lighthearted with a, I think when you read that and don't hear it, it comes off a little differently than I think he intended, but you know what he means. But we will remain committed to the game and the players as long as the players want to go play games. That's my commitment to the community. I'm kind of at a low point right now in terms of my delivery on that commitment to the community, but it very much stays. I want to support the team. I want to support the creative ambitions of the teams, and I want to support the players. We let a lot of people down this week with the launch of the game, but we will continue to strive on. You have to, right? That's what creative is about. Yeah, so I think it's really hard because if you think about remember in context that he is appearing on an Xbox podcast. And when he talks about the community, when he talks about the people that are being let down, when he talks about people calling for his head on Twitter and how that's gone over the years, like he is kind of playing to an extreme end of the gaming community because he is kind of, he is addressing or he is mentioning the fanboys, the extremists, the console weirdos that are out there. And these are the same people that are like mad that the game has come out on PC or whatever in a lot of cases. These are not people that you can these are people that I feel like are generally speaking not worth addressing. And so he's walking a very hard line here because I do think that there's a lot that you say to the overall the overall people who play video games, a lot of this is relevant to. But when he talks about letting down Xbox fans, I get bummed out because it just, you look at that and go like, man, there's a whole aspect of that job, of his job, of all of the jobs of the people around him that must just fucking suck because you are constantly, and PlayStation, I'm sure deals with the exact same thing. A lot of people at a lot of studios have very toxic fan bases, corners of their fan bases that are shitty. And how much, and I think about when the way we wrote reviews and how we tried to be bulletproof to prevent fanboy arguing and all this other stuff and how pointless it all was. That's their reality every goddamn day. Is they've got these fucking weirdos screaming their heads off about you're ruining the Xbox by not, where's the more exclusive and it's terrible that has to factor into this, right? Because normally you go hey, there are people out there that own Xboxes that want to play games on an Xbox that are perfectly reasonable people. And you've got to cater to them because they're your customers, not they're the community, not they're our most ardent fans. Or, that part of this is, it casts a frustrating shadow on a lot of this stuff. But that doesn't mean that any of the other stuff he's saying doesn't hold weight or that it's all targeted at that end of the fan base, right? Because I think that there's aspects of this that you just go yeah. But there have been people trying to say they need to get Phil Spencer out of there because he's too nice. He needs to take it to Sony and do that. It's no, he fucking doesn't. And a lot of the rest of this interview is I think devoted to kind of laying out where the actual battle lines are drawn in this industry, at least on the console side of it, the, you know, like that end of things. You know, if we just kind of set aside the obvious, you know, hey, mobile games are fucking massive. And there's a bit in here later on we'll get into that is a little bit about some of the mobile game stuff. And so, yeah, there's a little bit more about Redfall, and then we will move on. Okay. So this is some of the stuff I was talking about the expectations of shipping a first party game or whatever. We need to improve on engaging in games that are midway through production when they become part of Xbox. I do think there's a different expectation for a game and even a team when you've been third party and all of a sudden you become part of first party. There's a different expectation in terms of how you're going to perform on our console. There's a different competitive set when people look at what this game is and the other games they're going to say, hey, I want this game to feel as competitive as this other game on another console platform in our case. Which is... that sounds like he is saying, yes, you will become a target of fanboys and your game will take on an outsized importance that it almost doesn't deserve in most cases. Anyway, moving on. And we didn't do a good job early on in engaging with Arcane Austin to really help them understand what it meant to be part of Xbox and part of first party, and use some of our internal resources to help them and move along that journey even faster. So we left them to go work on the game. They're a very talented team. I love that team, and I still do. And I will totally bet on them to do another great game. When Matt Booty and Jamie Leder, who runs ZeniMax, and I sit down, I think we can engage earlier with our different studios. Thinking about how our internal processes of dev assistance, even some of our internal ATG resources, that's Advanced Technology Group, and how those work with our internal teams, I think we can do a better job. So he's basically saying, like, we left them to go do it on their own, and this is what they did. Which doesn't sound great. You know, hey, this team that has made incredibly beloved games like Dishonored, we let them go off and do what they do, and then then this is what they came back with. I guess they didn't understand what being a first party was. I like the wording of that is really funky. And I'd would probably also say maybe a little demoralizing. But also, this is another case where I say, like, them, you know, him saying, like, oh, we could have gotten in there. If we had gotten in there earlier, maybe we could have prevented this. Also kind of implies that the internal teams at Xbox are knocking it out of the park. And they're kind of not. They're kind of all over the place too. So I don't know, like maybe, yes, maybe if ATG and some of these other teams have gotten involved and whatever else, then yeah, maybe some other things could have happened along the way. But this is what they'll do, right? Is that they will, but like, when does that cross the line from like, hey, we've got to help you understand what it means to be in this spot, to meddling in the creative direction of these games, and so on and so forth. Like that's a very difficult line to walk. Do you think Harvey Smith stays at Arcane? Not that I'm not saying like, I'm not saying, oh, they'll push him out or whatever, but like, in light of this, do you think that a creative mind like that, a legendary creative mind like that, is going to go, yeah, sign me up for another one of these that you guys are going to be watching even closer? I feel like if I were him, I'd be like, all right, no, I'm not. I'm going to go do this somewhere else. Like, you guys are nuts. We'll see. Whatever. So yeah, I like that aspect of this. Kind of rings like the. It sounds a little. That doesn't sound like purely positive to me, you know. the idea of like, okay, well, if we had been involved earlier, maybe this would have gone differently. And like, sure, maybe on the technical end, like, sure, maybe they would have been like, oh, here's how you do the 60 frames per second stuff. And they, all right, there's more to this quote here. We did a better job with Starfield. Again, nobody should believe it until they're playing the game, but that game was earlier on in production and it was easier for us to swarm a bunch of people to go and help with some of the technology on our platform and ensure that we're going to ship a quality experience there. We should have been there for Harvey and the team earlier. That's on us. And then through the process, it's an Unreal game. We have a bunch of studios that have done some really good work, really great work on Unreal over the years. And I think we were too late to help in that when they had certain issues they were working through, which any team will. It's nothing to do with the specific engine. There's a lot of like asides, like, it's anyone's gonna do that. It's not Unreal's fault. It's not this. Oh, man. But we have a lot of experience and we needed to get on that earlier with the team and we didn't do that. That's not an excuse. So when the 60 frames per second issue came up, we were definitely diving in. We had people from the Coalition and people from Rare looking, both teams that have done some really great work with Unreal to help us build a 60 frames per second plan. But obviously that was a plan that had to be in place last fall in order for us to really be in a position to have it at launch. I take that as learning, as painful as it is. There's a bunch of other stuff I could go into, but then we end up with the dev doc. Yeah. It's the idea that we're getting this like half of a public postmortem on Redfall here is very weird. But I don't know, like they're walking a really weird tightrope because they can't go and pin this on Arcane. They have to take some of it on themselves. It's also a weird situation where I don't think at any point Redfall was a game that, again, even their own mock reviews were like, this is probably like a mid-7. They weren't coming at it like this is a game of the year contender. Like, they're not crazy. At no point did they market it that way. They just said, hey, we got this thing coming out and we think it's cool. And it turns out it was not. That happens. That happens a lot. A lot of games, a lot of game publishers think their games are cool, and then they come out and they're not. You know, Microsoft is certainly not the fucking first one to fall into that. But I would be curious to see how, you know, he talks about how things might change and how they might engage earlier on that process. And I guess like if I were on the creative end of building a game, I'm not sure that sounds positive. I'm not, and again, I think part of that is because I don't really feel like, Microsoft has been knocking it out of the park with their own games lately. So, you know, like, you know, he says like, obviously, and it's obviously true. Like, you know, I'm sure that there are people at the Coalition that are Unreal wizards, right? That know that engine inside and out and have been working on it and would have some suggestions and things that they could do to help out, that would help out with Redfall. Like, that's, of course, right? Of course. But yeah, I think Redfall ended up being this perfect storm timing wise, where it's one of the first games, you know, not the first, but it is coming out at a very awkward time, where it came out right around the time of the Activision deal getting shot down in the UK, which has a lot of people going like, well, what's next? And then you've got this hitting and it's not hitting the way it has to. And you have like those two things happening at the same time. And it again, Redfall takes on an outsized importance, and it's a shame. I feel bad for the team at Arcane, because this is a game that could have come out and flown under the radar. It would have been disappointing. And you would have been like, it's a bummer, but like, so was Crackdown. You know, not that they can afford to have games like that all the time, but it's certainly not the first time that Microsoft has shipped a game and been like, this game didn't get it done, you know? And so like in a company that is needed, they have needed a win for a real long time now, for a lot of years now, and they kind of aren't getting it in major ways. They're getting good small to medium sized victories, right? Forza Horizon comes out and people are like, this is a hell of a game, this is great. Pentiment comes out, people love it. Grounded went through its early access process, people really enjoyed it. They've acquired Obsidian, who's, been doing good work lately, though that they did that repackage of Outer Worlds that was kind of bunk. But that's more of a 2K. 2K published that, so that's sort of a different thing. But they need, I think, to be a console manufacturer in this day and age. Not that they're just a console manufacturer. Their business is expanded and they do different things, but like they need games. And it's not, I don't say they need games from a, like, the fanboys are restless. I think it's more like, hey, they sold consoles. Like, they can talk about how they're in third place and, oh, poor us, you need to let us merge with Activision all they want. But they still sold millions of Xboxes and they still have millions of Game Pass subscribers, and they still need to provide a steady flow of quality software for those people. And it seems like every time they've kind of had something go sideways for them, it almost feels like they are taking some chunk of money and just like pushing it over to the Game Pass deal makers and go, get us some more day ones. Just get us some more fucking day ones, because Jesus Christ, everything is rough over here on the first party side. Just go sign up some more third parties. And they can only do that so many times before they're out of deals to make. So, yeah. Kotaku also picked apart some stuff in here. Again, we're talking about the Phil Spencer interview on Xcast, which is kind of funny. His Xbox podcast. And I think that there's some interesting stuff that this is not, like, obviously we've talked a lot about Redfall, because that's kind of like that felt like the flashpoint that got this conversation really going. But the kind of larger conversation about where the Xbox brand is sitting is actually the more interesting one. And that's a lot of what we talked about last week, because a lot of it is like, what's next for Xbox? What do they do from here? Obviously, in about a month, they're going to make a bunch of announcements about some games that have been announced and some games that have not, according to them. And the rest of this interview is also quite fascinating, because it is about kind of the Xbox's place in the market, which, again, I think when we lay the foundation for this discussion that they had, you have to remember where Xbox is currently sitting, right? They are in a position where they are desperately trying to look like they need this Activision acquisition in order to compete. They have to look that way to the government authorities that can approve or deny the deal. They have to look as small and submissive as possible in that context. But every time they get out there and say that, or every time there are court documents out there that talk about, like, hey, we're in third fucking place by a lot, which is just the facts of it. I mean, that's in the stuff they filed with governments. We've been talking about that for a while now. This is not new news. It's just interesting to hear the head of the organization come out there and say it in an interview. But that's kind of where we're at with it. And so they're trying to thread a very interesting needle here. And we have a little bit of news, I think, on some of the stuff they have filed in the UK that maybe tips their hand as to where they're trying to focus. That is an attempt to make them seem smaller in a totally different way. And it's an interesting thing to watch, because normally, especially the console business, but really every publisher, they're out there beating their chest. They're like, we killed it. Like, Microsoft changed their business. And a lot of this interview kind of speaks to that, right? Is that they're not in the same race that Sony is. They're not in the same race that Nintendo is. And we tend to think about it as two separate categories, where you've got Nintendo out on its own with the low powered console that is selling gangbusters and, like, is the leading Like, go look at, especially Japanese sales and just, Splatoon is huge. Like, Nintendo is doing great on the first party front sales wise. No problems. People are frothing for this fucking Zelda release, which, like, they're going nuts for it. They're bonkers. They're bananas. Meanwhile, Xbox is in a position where they have to make sure that they seem like a viable platform for years to come to the audience. They have to make sure that they're selling the dream of get in the Xbox ecosystem. It's incredible over here. While also making sure that they don't talk about like, we're dominating, like our business, it's going great. They have to make sure that they don't make it look too good, because then the other, the governments will look at that stuff and shut them down. And the UK is trying to shut them down. So the quotes here are interesting because, it's the Kotaku story says, he pointed out that some onlookers have suggested that all Xbox needs to do is to win, is build great games, and that will shift things. But Spencer claims that just isn't true anymore. And here's the quote. We're not in the business of out-consoling Sony or out-consoling Nintendo. There isn't really a great solution or win for us. And I know that will upset a ton of people, but the truth of the matter is that when you're in third place in a console marketplace and the top two players are as strong as they are, and in certain cases have a discrete focus on doing deals and other things that will make being Xbox hard for us as a team, our vision is everyone on console has a great experience and they feel like a first-class citizen. So that's their focus. They're not, and, basically he's saying that they're not focused on beating Sony. They're not focused on, and basically he's going on to say they can't. Generationally speaking, I mean, I think if this industry has proven anything is that when new consoles come out, fucking anything can happen. The market leader loves to fuck up in this business. I don't know if you've noticed. Sony's done it. Nintendo's done it. Microsoft is in the middle of trying to undo it. And so basically, he's going on to say, there is no world where Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PlayStation 5s. That's not going to happen. And I think that's like, some people are going to read that as like, he's giving up, he's doing this. But again, this is where things get weird, right? Because you've got the weird console fanboy dumb argument that are going to look at this as going like, you got to fire him immediately because he's not even trying to fight the fight. And you're like, yeah, no shit. He's not even trying to fight the fight because Xbox has been trying to fight a different fight for years now. And that's Game Pass. And that's a services business. And that's a subscription business. And that's like, okay, time spent, number of hours, spent on playing Game Pass games. Like the metrics that their business turns on still involves console sales and install bases and all of that. But if you look at the bets they have tried to place, they are looking at it as like, okay, like you can play Game Pass on PC. You can get our games on PC. We don't care. We'll put some of our games on Switch and PlayStation. Fuck it. Like they, and remember that a lot of this came from the absolute drubbing the Xbox One got in the marketplace. I think this was probably the right move for them either way when you think about how the business is likely to evolve, that a subscription service like Game Pass makes a ton of sense no matter what. But Microsoft is trying to be a services company. And so Game Pass aligns with the overall corporate direction as well. So it gives them an answer internally to say, hey, here's what we're doing. And it's services. Because Microsoft thinks services is the future. Or the now, even. And so, of course, as they pivot their business in this direction, the old story just continues to look worse and worse and worse. The install base, which is the only number we ever used to care about, right? It was the only thing that when people are like, how's the console war going? You're like, well, PlayStation is outselling Xbox in Europe because that's the stronghold.
Outside of Japan, that's their big stronghold. In the US, Xbox is dominating. It all evens out to Xbox slightly ahead of PlayStation 3, but then in the end, you factor in the Japanese market and some of this other stuff, and it ends up basically being a dead heat or whatever. And so they place their bet on Game Pass, which I still think is the right move, even if the business there has not been growing at the rate that they want. Because they were not going to win on console sales. And Phil Spencer goes on to say, like, you know, that this was the worst generation for them to lose when it comes to the Xbox One versus the PlayStation 4. This is something I hadn't considered, but I think it's dead on accurate. I think that it is, you know, when we think about the woes that Microsoft has been facing, I think this puts a number on it in a way that I hadn't really thought of before. Because you think about it like, oh, in terms of just like mind share, or these kind of more ephemeral concepts where like people think the Xbox One was underpowered. It got hit with that 900p stuff. And those all have knock-on effects. The DRM story, of course, lasted a lot longer than it probably should have, but it hurt them a lot. At a time when PlayStation 4 was in its humble hat in hand, we're sorry about the PlayStation 3. We know, how'd that cell processor in your refrigerator work out? Not so good. All right, well, here's a... And then at the time, Microsoft was like, we're making a Halo TV show, and you're going to plug your cable box into your Xbox. Like, the fuck I'm not. But what he has to say about it being the worst generation to lose is that that's also the generation where everyone's digital libraries really started and started taking on even greater importance when it comes to backwards compatibility, was the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. So by losing that generation, by having a lot of Xbox players move over to the PlayStation ecosystem at that time, they had PlayStation players building up a digital library of PlayStation 4 games that they may still care about. Even if they're not playing it, there is that kind of back of mind, like, I care about this continuity. If I don't buy a PlayStation 5, all my PlayStation 4 games can only be played on a PlayStation 4, and I don't want to leave that thing hooked up. But hey, if I buy a PlayStation 5, my friends list is still there, my this is still there. You know, they made that ecosystem shift and also built up a big digital games library. I'm not saying that this is the only factor, but it is a factor I had not considered overall. And so, yeah, I agree. That was, if you had to lose a generation, that is the worst one to lose, because it is when a lot of the conversation started to shift around digital downloads and buying games digitally instead of physically and all of this other stuff. And so that has a knock-on effect that they're still dealing with to this day. I mean, I can speak from experience on that front that, you know, like that was the time when I, you know, as someone who, I spent a good long time caring an awful lot about achievement points on the Xbox. I still have more than most of my friends do, even after years of not really working on that number. And I think trophies are bad. I think the PlayStation side of things, I think the trophy system, it does not roll up to a nice number the way that the Xbox stuff does, and it becomes a little more like, oh, I'm level this, percent this, and you know, it's not as well done. But I walked away from achievements completely when the PlayStation 4 came out because it was a better place to play games. Period. I walked away from my Xbox friends list because the PlayStation was a better place to play games. Period. At the time, they went and did some things around the edges that helped as well. You remember, like, that was around the time that the Call of Duty co-marketing deal shifted from years of Microsoft having it and Microsoft getting, DLC first and some of this other shit, to Sony stepping in and saying, no, now we have the co-marketing deal. At the time, there was a little back and forth with Microsoft. Someone publicly saying like, oh, well, we think they overpaid for it. And I think Sony's response being like, we know exactly what we paid for it. We're doing okay. Granted, they backed Call of Duty through one of the worst eras of Call of Duty, but I think that mattered at the time to some players, right? And so everything's stacked against the Xbox with that. You know, mostly the decisions that they made themselves. I remember the trip up to Seattle, the Redmond, whatever. I remember the trip to Microsoft to see the Xbox One for the first time. I remember sitting in that audience and it dawning on me that they were going to call it the Xbox One about 15 minutes before they said the name, because of how focused they were on. It's the one place for your one cable, your cable box, the one device you need, the one input on your TV, the one, like the way they hammered it home. Eventually I was like, oh yeah, they're going to call it the Xbox One. That's dumb, but I get it. I get why they would call it that. I don't think it's great, but at the time there was a lot of talk that they were going to just call it Xbox, which I think would have been that would have been a worse name for that console in particular. To say, here it is, the Xbox, by the way, it sucks, would have been really frustrating. And it was a really fascinating day. We went all around the campus and we went into the lab where they made the controller, and they had all of these prototype controllers, and they showed how they tested everything and how they built everything and all of this different stuff. And we got to hold a controller that was just hooked up to a PC, and it was just like, pull this trigger and it'll vibrate so you can feel what that feels like. It wasn't even hooked up to a game. And going like, okay, yeah, no, this just feels like the Xbox 360 controller, but better. I get it. Okay, cool. And, you know, I interviewed, I think, Albert Pinello there, and, you know, went around and talked to a bunch of different people, and they just kind of just moved us around and said, like, here's all the different stuff we're doing to make the next Xbox. And you're like, oh, that's all pretty cool. I don't know. The TV stuff sounds awkward, but I get why they would do it. As long as they got the games, whatever. And then everyone who was at that event got back on the bus to go back into Seattle, go back to the hotel, and go home, you know, of the next day, I guess. I remember walking to a Fat Burger because I was not near a Fat Burger at the time, and I was like, I want to get a burger with an egg on it, god damn it. And so I'm going to walk like 3 miles out of my way to go to the Fat Burger. Everyone got back on the bus. And I think, if I remember right, it was like Brian Crescente was kind of at the center of some of this conversation. But it was a lot of like all of the people who were there taking notes all day and, you know, learning about the console. And then we all get back on the bus and everyone just kind of starts lightly comparing notes. And that's when it all fell apart, because everyone talked to a different executive. I talked to Pinello. Some people talked to Phil Harrison. I think some people talked to Matrick. I don't know who else was on the executive interview firing line that day. But we weren't on that bus. We were not out of the parking lot before someone went like, man, I can't believe this always online DRM thing, huh? And someone was like, oh, I'm sorry, what? No, yeah, the thing that Phil Harrison said about this is the DRM and the online and the always online stuff and this stuff. And people are like, no, I asked this person about that and they said this. And they said, no, it was not going to be that. It was going to be more like the DRM was going to be this. And I was like, no, I talked to this person and they said. And suddenly everyone, it was basically like going like, what did you hear? And so everyone just started like trying to piece this together and going like, holy shit. And you realized they had no fucking idea what they were talking about. That, you know, whether everything had come in so hot that they weren't read in on all of the details or whatever, but it wasn't like, oh, people were lying to us. It was like, oh, they don't know what they're doing. And it seems to be that perhaps they are about to do the worst thing they could do in terms of building an always online console. Holy shit. So basically everyone starts getting on the phone. Everyone starts, like stories start getting written on the bus. And phone calls like, hey, what's the actual story here? Hey, we heard conflicting things here. We're trying to sort it out. What is actually real? And then they came out and said like, oh yeah, what they said about the always on. Yeah, that's the real thing. Yes. Like, oh, the worst case scenario is the one you're going with here. Great. And the whole thing was fucking sunk right there. Done. Finished. Wiped off the fucking map. Any kind of goodwill from walking around and meeting all these people who were really excited to show you the controller that they had spent years perfecting or, updating and everything else. And seeing like, oh, here's a room where if you stand in here long enough, all you can hear is your heartbeat and you'll go insane. And we go in here because we use this room to try to train the voice stuff for the Kinect and this aspect of it. And you're like, okay, all right. I don't want to use Skype on an Xbox, but cool, man. Poof, gone. All the goodwill of that day, all of the like, man, they really were very open with us. They sure did walk us around and show us a lot of stuff. You're like, oh. But depending on what interview you got, you either got the realest detail of them all or you didn't. And also, some people got conflicting details that make it sound like they're not doing that in a way that makes it seem like they don't have their shit together. And so, the internet was on fire by sundown, I think. I think that stuff got out there that fast. It might have been the next day or something, but it didn't take long for like, hey, here's the story we wrote based on what Phil Harrison told us, based on what we heard in this interview. Now we're hearing that may not be the case. We're trying to get clarification. Oh, wait, the clarification is in fact that, yes, they intended for this console to always be connected to the internet. And it's been, you can say like, oh, them getting up and talking about television and some of their ambitions in that space, like, were misguided. And you're like, yes, definitely. Definitely misguided, especially if they didn't have the games. I mean, people love Screen Coaster, right? No. But boy, it's a moment in time. Like you saw it go up in smoke right there. Gus asks, do you think that they thought Sony would follow? So what I do know about the always online DRM stuff back then is that third parties were very in favor of the idea, or at least the bigger ones. I remember hearing that, like, EA was like, fuck yeah, man. Because EA had been trying to kill used games forever. All the Project $10 stuff, all the things that they were trying to do were moving in the direction of trying to find ways to stop the sale of used games. And what Xbox was doing would do that. And so I remember there being a situation, I remember hearing that there was a situation where EA was trying to basically, like, EA wanted Sony to follow suit and maybe thought that they would. I also heard conflicting things out of a single person at Sony that said, and you've heard us and some of the people around that I worked with at that time say stuff like this, that we heard highly specifically, yes, Sony was going to do it. And that then they were not. And then suddenly the person who said, yes, we were going to do it was like, I never said that. I'm like, oh, okay. You did? Okay. So I don't know what the actual story is there, right? But I do know that Sony probably had to at least consider it because they had third parties trying to put pressure on them to do it. And so I don't know if they had already walked away from this by the time the Microsoft thing happened, but by the time the Microsoft thing happened, I think they very quickly were like, we can capitalize on this, and this will help us in what is sure to be a very fucked up fight. And so they heard it. They made the video. You got Adam and Shu passing a disc back and forth. Boom. I don't know. I don't know what you want to say. It's wild. But yeah, I was always under the impression that could have gone a very different way on the Sony side of things. And if you look at where we are right now, digital sales, like all they had to do was let it happen naturally, because consumer trends were going to head in that direction anyway with digital sales of games because of the convenience factor. That more and more people were going to start buying. You look at the Jedi Survivor sales compared to the Fallen Order sales. That's something that people are doing right now these days and going like, oh, the physical sales for Jedi Survivor are way down. And they're like, yeah, dumbass. It's because everyone bought it digitally. Like, it's outselling the previous game. Don't worry about it. If they had just not done any of that and let it happen naturally, which is what the trend was going to be, it was easy to see at that point that was, eventually people would get there. As long as there was enough sales and enough different, you kind of wanted to have something that didn't have to directly compete with Steam, which was known at the time even for having a lot of crazy sales across the year. You just needed to look at it and go like, hey, the console digital storefronts don't have enough sales. They need to have more of them. To match kind of what the expectation is on Steam or whatever. And that'll be it, man. The rest will just fucking fall in line. It'll fall like fucking dominoes. But Microsoft tried to push it. And now here they are. Third place. Talking about how they can't bring it back. Talking about how no one game is going to bring things back for them. Obviously, a lot of other mistakes happened along the way, but and Sony did a lot of things right at a very critical time. I don't want to oversimplify the situation, but it's really striking. So when you think about the last, I guess, decade in this business, in the console business specifically, obviously, I mean, shit. Again, I'll say that one of the reasons why third parties were slow to put out a lot of games on that generation of consoles was because they were worried that people didn't want consoles anymore. There was a genuine fear, or not fear, but like there was a genuine thought of like, mobile games are really blowing up. We really need to invest more in mobile. And this is still the case. They're still saying this. All the new generation of players is not buying consoles. But they will all have phones. We need to be thinking about that as our primary market. And then both of those consoles, well, more the PlayStation than the Xbox, but the PlayStation outsold its targets, and suddenly it was like, oh, people do want consoles still, so we better get our asses in gear and make a bunch of games. That's why you started to see a bunch of remasters and shit at the start of that generation, is because legit, like, there was some hand-wringing at a lot of third-party publishers about like, we don't know how much we want to invest in console development anymore because we're not sure. And part of that was a factor of like the used game sales and some of this other stuff that they felt were eating into their market share, eating into their money or whatever. Just a very weird time. Yeah, and you got all the second screen gaming crap because they're like, well, maybe we can kind of have our cake and eat it too. We can have a phone experience and that'll be exciting and engaging and new. And it was always a neat idea, but I don't think anything ever did it well enough to feel vital because they couldn't rely on everyone having a phone. And then the Wii U did it right, I guess, in a weird way. But yeah, it's I agree when Phil Spencer says there's no world in which Starfield is an 11 out of 10 and people start selling their PlayStation 5s. That's not going to happen. I agree with him 100%. But again, I think if we look at history, even in this era of digital ecosystems chasing us around, I think the right platform can, the right new platform can sway people. It'll get harder over time because people will build up their digital libraries, especially if backwards compatibility continues to be a thing. If we get to a PlayStation 6 and whatever the next Xbox is, and those things are still compatible back 2 generations, 3 generations, whatever it is, then that trough gets deeper and harder for Xbox to climb out of, in a way. But also, there is something resembling a reset. Maybe not a full reset, but there's as close as you can get to a reset in this business when new platforms come out. Because again, if it didn't happen, then PlayStation 4 never would have been the success that it was. And the Xbox 360 would not have been the success that it was because people would have just bought a PlayStation 3. I remember being in line. I remember interviewing people in line that were lining up to buy a PlayStation 3 the night before they came out in San Francisco. And, someone was in line and you ask them like, well, what games are you getting? It's like the standard questions that you just ask like consumers or whatever, right? When they're lining up. There's only someone like, how long you been here? Awesome. What are you looking forward to? And the number of people in that PlayStation 3 launch day line that were like Madden. In the line at the Metreon. Yeah. They were like, I'm getting Madden. Right. Okay. There's you don't want to stop and say it because you're just like, whatever, man. I'm moving on to the next person. I got work to do. But you almost want to stop and go, there's another console that had one of those last year, right? But they were entrenched. They bought a PlayStation 2. They played Madden on it. So they bought a PlayStation 3 so they could play Madden on it. You have people like that too, that don't, even faced with a year of like, you could have had last year's Madden on the Xbox. What? There's like no logic. You're like, dude, what? You should have bought an Xbox probably by now. But I'm not going to have that conversation with you. We're just going to move on. What the fuck is wrong with you? Anyway, moving on. Like, you have people like that too, that just like have whatever brand loyalty and all of that stuff as well. So I don't know. It's a bizarre scenario, but I think a lot of it comes back to companies thinking that their game business is all sewn up, and so they can afford to look elsewhere to grow their user base. In the case of the PlayStation 3, it was a little bit of the cell processor stuff, which was always a weird, ambiguous thing. But when they were like, you're going to buy a fridge that has this process, like the PlayStation 3 felt like part of a larger initiative to get this processor into whatever devices they could or something like that. And then on the Xbox end, you had it a couple of different ways, right? You had the cable box TV stuff, and then you had Kinect. Which, like, on its surface, I think the Xbox 360 version of the Kinect, I don't have a lot of terrible things to say about it, except that a lot of the games weren't good. But I can't blame them for trying it. And when it worked, you were like, this is kind of neat. I don't know. Like, I will still take Dance Central over Just Dance or any of the other dancing games because it was actually doing something resembling real tracking, as opposed to now you play Just Dance with a fucking phone in your hand and that's how they track it. And you're like, fuck that. That's fake ass shit. But then the Kinect integration on the Xbox One, and at the time, remember, they were saying like, oh yeah, I don't think the console, we were hearing this, I don't think that we were hearing this out of developers that had dev kits. I don't think Microsoft was necessarily saying this, I can't remember, but they were like, a Kinect is in every box. And you have to have it hooked up. Like the word was getting around that if you didn't have the Kinect plugged in when you turned on the Xbox One, it would not work. Which was another really solid fucking moment of just like, gee, are you fucking serious? Are you fucking crazy? So with the Xbox One, they made every, they made every wrong choice they could around the stuff that wasn't immediately related to playing games. And then on top of that, the launch games were not amazing either. So it was really a perfect storm. And here we are, right? I mean, you know, in a lot of ways, the stuff that's been happening over the last couple of weeks, you know, the very idea that Microsoft is in a position where they feel they should buy Activision, right? Is sort of all, a lot of it comes back to some of that stuff, you know? A lot of it comes back to like, well, you know, there's that aspect of it, but also like, oh, you know, yeah, Halo ain't hitting the way it used to. Some of the franchises are getting a little long in the tooth. The tastes of the players have maybe changed ever so slightly. And then the Xbox offering of software has not gotten it done. It's not to say they don't have any games that people like or, you know, whatever, like, you know, but they're just not getting it done to the degree that you would expect out of a first party. And it's wild. Yeah, I guess, like, yeah, when I sit and think about, you know, we talked about a lot of this last week as well, right? But you know, it's a really wild place that we're in right now, you know, and it's Microsoft, I think, has done a pretty good job overall of kind of pivoting its business to not be about pure install base of consoles. You know, the fight they were losing with the Xbox One. That's when they were like, oh, we now, they stopped reporting the numbers at one point. I said that last week, but like at one point they stopped talking about numbers of consoles sold and some of this other shit. Instead, they were just like, yeah, a lot of people played games on Xbox Live this month. It's our best month ever for Xbox Live engagement, which, you know, made sense as a comparison because all the phone numbers were about, all the mobile numbers, not phone numbers, but all of the numbers involved in mobile gaming were around that style of engagement. So in some ways, it made them seem forward thinking. They were like, oh, console sales, yeah, sure. Fine, yeah, that's, yeah, if you're still playing that game, we're over here thinking about the future. And then Game Pass kind of led into some of those numbers changing as well. And so I think those are smart moves that they made, that they had to make. And if the Xbox One had been a smash hit and the PlayStation 4 had been in the Xbox One's position, I don't think Microsoft would have done any of that. They wouldn't have felt the need to. So yeah, I don't know. It's a really, just the framework for this whole conversation around fucking Redfall of all things, you know, and everything else is really, it's really crazy. But you know, it's why, you know, some of the other stuff in here is, you know, Phil Spencer saying that Microsoft kind of has a different vision for what the gaming business, or what their gaming business looks like. And it's the sort of thing, you know, like in some ways it makes, you know, PlayStation, I think, when you look at Sony's behavior around the Activision buyout and how they tried to make it as hard as possible, and some of the things they were saying in their arguments that just didn't feel like it didn't feel like it came from a purely honest place. A lot of that comes off as a business that has failed to evolve, trying to clutch on to their existing business model as tightly as they can. And honestly, why wouldn't they? It's working for them. They're selling PlayStation 5s hand over. They're doing fucking great. So I can't blame them for it, per se. But at the same time, you know, you look at Nintendo continuing to go off into its own direction with whatever the fuck they're doing. You look at Microsoft trying to recast its business as a services business. And then you've got Sony sitting there in the middle going like, I don't know, we just want to sell consoles and games for those consoles. That's how it's worked since the 70s or 80s. You know, we're just going to keep doing that. And it's hard to argue with that approach when you think about, you know, yeah, Game Pass isn't necessarily growing at the rate they want it to. The cloud business is, there was an interesting story here out of Windows Central that is kind of focused on some of the response that Microsoft has pushed to The CMA, which I should really remember what that stands for, but it is the regulatory arm in the UK that is the one shutting down the Activision acquisition of Microsoft, or yes, the acquisition of Activision by Microsoft. The Competition and Markets Authority. Thank you. Jez Corden wrote this up, but also is pointing to one of their writers on Twitter. An editor over at Tweaktown who was kind of pulled out some quotes from Microsoft's response here. Because now remember, the CMA shut this down on the basis that cloud gaming is a thing and that they don't want to have to set up a regulatory body to worry about cloud gaming. Which sounds a little lazy on their part, but for something they think is going to be as big a deal as it seems to be, them not wanting to regulate it or not being willing to regulate it is sort of a weird reason. So now we have Microsoft's kind of Hail Mary rebuttal here, where they're going to try to get this deal over the line, which sounds like a very much an uphill battle, because most of the time when these deals get shut down, the appeals are not usually successful, but they are going to try as hard as they can. So some of this is out of the CMA's kind of final decision. And it's Microsoft saying, cloud gaming on mobile devices has been unsuccessful, citing the performance of Fortnite on xCloud as an example of difficulty in attracting and retaining gamers. It also submitted, it being Microsoft here, also submitted that with the increasing computational power of mobile devices, many gaming companies are increasingly developing native mobile games, meaning there is unlikely to be material demand for cloud gaming on mobile devices, which Microsoft also submitted depends on the user having a stable internet connection. So now you have Microsoft saying like, yeah, you think the cloud business is the thing, but like no one fucking wants that. Turns out no one wants that either. And things are moving in the direction away from cloud gaming in favor of native mobile games. Like a Genshin Impact is a great example here of a game that runs natively there. Isn't Fortnite on phones? No. Remember, Apple pulled Fortnite off of phones because Epic started that big lawsuit. So this is why they're using Fortnite as an example here, because Fortnite is a game people used to play on phones in droves and then suddenly couldn't. And so they're like, we'll let you play Fortnite on a phone here. And it didn't do it. It did not draw that many more people to cloud gaming. It did not retain, that is basically what they're saying here. So now we're going to go through this next cycle of whatever they're going to say to the CMA, where now they're going to also say, by the way, our cloud gaming business ain't shit either. And so you're like, okay, what part of the Microsoft gaming business is going well right now? Because it ain't the xCloud stuff. Game Pass is going good, right? It's Game Pass, right? I mean, it's not necessarily probably doing the numbers that they would want it to, but it's probably the one part that they can point at and go like, this is cool. This subscription service at least is going cool. But we can't make it sound like it's going too cool, because then you might not let us buy Activision. So it's fucking wild out there. It's wild out there right now. And so this is why I think all of these conversations lead to you do start to wonder, like, well, okay, what real appetite does Microsoft have for gaming if it's going to go through all this? If they're gonna start taking hits on this, if their reputation is going to start taking hits based on the Xbox division not getting it done. The cloud stuff I always liked the cloud business based on specifically how they would frame it as an option. As like, hey, yeah, we're not going to replace consoles. I think the Xbox story increasingly becoming about the idea of choice, of like, whether it's like, yeah, you can choose to play these games on an Xbox console, but you could choose to play them on a PC, or you could choose to play them on your phone with a Game Pass subscription and our streaming service. You can choose all of those things. That always sounded good to me, because you're going to find users that are in different positions of like, I don't want to spend, or I can't spend X numbers of hundreds of dollars on a console right now, but I can subscribe to a service and I can play them on my laptop, or I can play them on a phone, or whatever, in a web browser, you know, what have you. I think that story makes a ton of sense. I think it sums up kind of where a lot of this stuff is going, but none of it's there yet. None of it. Quite. You know, the Game Pass stuff is as close as they're getting. Like, it's like there's definitely demand for it. It's a great service. But again, a lot of the story on that is helped or harmed by the quality of Microsoft's own first party games. Much like people care about Netflix originals. Like, what is Netflix putting on Netflix? Because I can watch fucking all of these other third-party movies that you've got on your service. I can watch those any damn place. You know? So increasingly the stuff that's only on Netflix because we paid for it. Like, Xbox is in a similar boat there, where it's like, yeah, that's cool that, you know, but also a lot of people are playing that on PlayStation. A lot of people are playing it elsewhere, and whatever else. So it's just, I don't know. It's obviously a very weird business. And I don't know, you know, I don't know what happens now. I think that's exciting in some ways, but also really weird in others, right? Where it's like, okay, you know, does this sink the Activision deal? We know that like the term of it comes up in July, so Activision could walk away at that point if they wanted to. But do they get this done? Everything I've read, and I'm not an expert on this, but everything I've read about the appeals process with the CMA is that it's highly unlikely that they change their ruling. So that makes it sound like it's very difficult for Activision to. It'll be very difficult for this acquisition to go through, but I don't know for sure. And even if it does, you know, now it definitely doesn't happen this year. So anything you were, you know, thinking like, oh, well, Game Pass will be bolstered because we'll eventually have Diablo. It's kind of still in its release window. They'll still have it kind of in, you know, they'll still get the next Call of Duty. They'll still get them, you know, it kind of gets a little weird. And then does Activision sell to somebody else? That would have been something that I would have felt more strongly about a year ago. But as the economy has changed, I mean, you would have thought like, oh, okay, yeah, if Microsoft doesn't get it, then Tencent will. And now you're like, oh, Tencent's not going to, probably not going to be able to afford this. And also, you know, if everyone is shitting on big tech mergers and all this other stuff now, like maybe no one else gets it over the line either. And Activision just goes it alone, and then we have to hear Bobby Kotick's name a lot more for a lot more years to come. Ugh. And, you know, to sum it up, this is how Axios kind of summed up a lot of the Phil Spencer comments here with this one quote. I'm just going to say there's not a win for Xbox in staying in the wake of somebody else. Which I look at that as like, yeah, that's kind of a summary of how they've been trying to change their business, and maybe there's more changes to come. But I don't know. You know, they're facing a lot of hard situations, and they, you know, he can sit there and say no one game is going to change things, but I think a lot of conversations about the future of the Xbox brand do get a little bit easier if they've got a string of medium to big hits under their belts. If they had the bangers, I think Game Pass would be helped by that. You know, if they could point to, we've got the fucking biggest games in the world on Game Pass, whether that's Call of Duty or whether that's like whatever they're working on that magically turns out to be amazing, whether it's Starfield or you know, Perfect Dark. I don't know. But like, if they can have a string of those together, that does start to change things, or at least gets them back to a place where, like, next time we do this, next time we roll out new consoles, which is still gonna, I think we'll at least get one more generation of like that being in people's minds a good place to reset, and that'll only get diminished as years go on, I think. But I think we still got one more of those. They can get back into position to make their business matter a little more next time around. Maybe. You think their opponent needs to fumble as well? I think that Sony is slowly fumbling, I might say, by not changing up their business. I think that and also by focusing on the two types of games that they seem to be focusing on, I think that that's stuff that will work up to a point, and I think it's stuff that will eventually cool on them a little bit. I don't know when, but Sony's in that position where it feels like they are not making a lot of moves. Obviously, they acquired Bungie, and there's some stuff happening there, but like it feels stagnant to me in a way. I'll at least give Microsoft credit. They are failing at interesting new things. Right? I mean, you know, they're trying to change things up. They are not fully successful in any of those things, but they are at least trying to do something. Does Sony have to make moves? I think yes. I think that in order to constantly stay top of mind across mainstream consumers, I think you always have to be thinking about ways you're going to change your business. And it's not just we need to get some live games in our portfolio. I think that's smart. And I think that's a good move for them. They will get whatever is next from Bungie, obviously. Whether it's exclusive or not, I don't know. You know, maybe they'll let Bungie continue to roll out across the board. I would assume so. But yeah, PlayStation VR 2 is a good point. In terms of conversations that started and stopped in the course of a week. But you know, like you can't knock Sony on too much more than that. You can sit there and go like, yeah, it doesn't feel like they're pushing things forward. Like it doesn't feel like they're in the driver's seat in a lot of ways. Nintendo is really, but they're not. Nintendo was in the same boat. Like, they're not pushing the medium forward. And I don't think it's necessarily on them to do that, obviously. And true innovation is going to come from smaller teams and smaller companies. I guess I would just say that, like, the smaller teams and divisions you would hope would be inside Sony pushing for that change are getting shut down. So I don't know. The Sony story feels weird to me. You know? That's all on that. Here's a single sentence news story out of the Nikkei in Asia. Tom Ivan posted this on Video Games Chronicle. Development seems to be progressing well, but a product launch won't happen before next spring at the earliest. That's a source claiming to be talking about the next Nintendo hardware. They just gave their results, financial results, so this is kind of on the wake of that a little bit, I guess. Where they said the demand for the Switch is maybe slowing down a little bit, which, like, you know, duh, right? A 16.5% year-over-year decline in their Switch hardware projections. And also that Nintendo did also say that they suggested, I guess at least, that they would not have new hardware before April 2024 at the earliest. I think that would still be pretty early for them to be launching a new console, a new device, whatever you want to call it. I feel like we will get one more year out of the Switch. This is just gut feeling. This isn't really. This is just like, I don't know, landscape stuff. I think 2025 is a year for the follow up. That's just, and I could be wildly wrong, right? But I just feel like if a new Switch, if a new Nintendo hardware was out a year from now, we would you'd start to hear a little bit more than this single sentence. Development seems to be progressing well. I feel like the last thing I heard about it was that they had a direction, but that was a little while ago. That they knew what they were going to be doing and were working on it. So, we'll see. You know, Zelda's out on Friday. I don't know. I feel like there's been some light discussion out of the previews about performance on Tears of the Kingdom, which is not shocking to hear. You know, the Switch is getting pretty old, and it launched with performance issues in that Zelda game. So yeah, you know, we'll see how all that goes. And then obviously they have a handful of announced games that will probably still. I think that's part of what's factoring into why I don't think we will see a new Nintendo console in 2024, especially like in the first half of 2024. Because it just feels like they've just got more to do with the Switch before they're fully done with it. I don't have Tears of the Kingdom. I don't get stuff early from Nintendo. I tend to get stuff when I do get stuff from them, I get it as it's coming out. That's kind of been their MO for most outlets these days. So I'm not even like hiding some embargoed details on that game. I'm interested to see how it all goes. I think it's like there's a lot of foregone. People seem to be thinking about this as if it's like the biggest thing to ever launch, and like I don't know. It's the second Zelda game on a platform. You saw how that went for Majora's Mask. I don't know. People saying Nintendo jail. Nintendo has changed quite a lot about how they send out games over the last couple of years. Maybe if they stopped leaking off the line, they would gain a little more confidence in sending them out. But yeah, there's no. I don't know. There was a time there that my understanding was that they were thinking about not sending out anything to anyone because they were so paranoid about leaks of every game. That at one point there was discussion internally about simply not sending anything out anymore at all across the board. So, yeah, they're not. I don't think they're quite on that track anymore. But I don't know. I don't pay much attention to the who gets what when stuff anymore. It's whatever. Especially when it comes to them, like they're so particular about that. But yeah, I don't know. Like all the trailers and stuff for that game look incredible, and I really want to see people play it. But to me, it looks more like a silly, awesome, physicsy sandbox than a Zelda game. I guess. Like I don't know. Like that's maybe a weird. And I want to see. I want to see all that shit. I want to see what people are gonna do and slap things together and do all their stuff. Alana Pierce got her Twitch DMCA'd because she watched approved YouTube footage. Well, that's a mistake. I mean, shit happens. What? I mean, obviously, things leaked, and now you've got the like fucking hardcore clampdown, like, hey, what the fuck thing, and mistakes will happen. Like, what do you know? Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Like I'm that game's gonna do just fine. Like whatever, right? Like it sounds like it's fucking cool as hell. And just conceptually, I think it's pretty awesome to see that. But there's been a weird the talk around it is like it's gonna be the biggest thing in the world. And I'll be curious. I'll be curious to see how that ends up going. Like I don't know. I feel like the Breath of the Wild discussion when it came out was like, this is really awesome and it's a really amazing video game, but it didn't. I don't know, like people talked about it for years to come and everything, but there's just a weird. It's a follow up. They're making another one, and they're reusing some assets along the way, and that's cool, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. But you look at it and go like, yeah, I don't know, man. It's gonna still have to run on the Switch, and so there's gonna kind of be some built-in performance fun because of that, and I don't know. It's It looks incredible, like the some of the stuff you can build and do and whatever else. Like my thoughts on that are that was what all of the videos of Breath of the Wild became over time, is just people making fucking insane shit and doing insane physics things, and that stuff was all hella cool. And it feels like Nintendo sat down and said like, those videos are cool. We should make a game that is even crazier toolbox for the people that want to do that shit. And I could never do any of that shit in Breath of the Wild because it was all like launch in the air, then switch to this power and do this and do that. And I'm like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm fine. So I very much doubt that they built a game that is going to require you to do all of that shit. But that seems to be what they showed off most recently, is like, here's some wild, crazy stuff. And you can think about how that might interact, especially if you are playing at that high level of sandbox nonsense. I don't know. I'm very much looking forward to seeing it, but I wonder if I will get more out of watching videos of other people playing it than I will playing it myself, because I want to see that crazy shit. I want to see the people that made the crazy Breath of the Wild shit going like, all right, now we're going to stand on this rock and launch halfway across the map. And then when we get to this point, we're going to use the up power. So he climbs through this rock up to this, and then we're going to fly off this, like what is all the crazy stuff that's going to happen there? That sounds fun as hell. And so I'm sure that we'll get a lot of that, right? Or ideally we'll get a lot of that. I mean, hopefully it sure seems like the game is going to be built for that. We talked about this. I was on, if you want to hear more of me, which sounds impossible, but here we go. On a podcast called The Sunday Scroll with John Warren. We talked a little bit about Zelda there too. So check that out. But yeah, I don't know. Like it's the what they've shown of that game sandbox wise almost feels like it should have Vine built into it. It should have like, can this thing spit out animated GIFs that I can just throw up online somewhere? Well, whatever. Blue Sky doesn't support animated GIFs yet, so fuck animated GIFs. They're dead. Anyway, that's going to do it for the show. Thanks, everybody, for hanging out. It's, I don't know. We'll talk about Zelda next week. And this Xbox stuff is going to linger for a long time, I think. This is something that, I don't know that there's much more to say. I don't know that they'll have too much more to say, because I think they're going to let the showcase do the talking from here. Which is probably the right move if they're feeling confident about the showcase, is to say, hey, we've got some games coming out, instead of any more of the kind of apology trail or whatever. But like, I think that they said, I think the interview, you should go check it out. The Xcast with Phil Spencer. I've not listened to all of it, but like, it's a relatively rare thing that you don't get out of a lot of video game executives, because again, I think Xbox is at a very unique point in time where you can see how they got into this mess, and we're watching the struggle as they try to get out of it, as the video game industry has become a very different thing. And I don't know where it all ends, or where it all ends up. for anybody anymore. It's a remarkable time, with where we're at on all of this stuff. That goes for all Nintendo, Sony. Like, it's not just an Xbox thing. It's a remarkable time for games right now. And the games industry and the business and the things that it's going through as it tries to figure out kind of whether that's like, hey, what's the right way to sell a game? What's the right way to get a game into players' hands? From indie developers trying to solve discovery problems on the storefronts to the biggest developers trying to find ways to, make subscription services and some of this other stuff. Like, there's so much happening across the board right now. And we're starting to get games that are really good. I mean, hey, there's another Star Wars patch hitting this week, supposedly. Maybe it'll be the one that lets me play more of the game. That's what all I want. All I want to do is finish fucking Star Wars Jedi Survivor. Because every time I do play an hour or so of that game without it crashing, I'm like, this is fucking awesome. I'm having a great goddamn time with this game. And then it crashes and I go like, God damn it. So that's all. I just want to do that. I want to get through that before I move on to anything else, man. So we'll see. Anyway, that's going to do it for me here. I'm going to push this button. We'll let the music play us out here. I'll be back this week with some streams of some video games. I assume Friday we'll play Zelda. I'll buy it, or maybe I should probably email somebody. And I don't know. We'll do something tomorrow too. That Cannon Dancer Osman port came out. I've been meaning to take a look at that. And who knows what else. I don't know. There was a Meet Your Maker patch that changed a lot of the scoring for bases to make it easier to prestige your base, which is a solid change in my book. So maybe we'll check in on that. There's a new trap in Meet Your Maker. So I don't know. We'll poke around. We'll find some video games. We'll look at them. And so on and so forth. For the rest of time. For all of eternity. I'll see you next week.